If you like the story, you can support the author on Patreon. Link is in the description.
Chapter 26, Bandits. For the next few months, I showed Julius around. I took him to the Gringotts main bank and showed him what we were doing there and what the protocols were. After that, we went north where the wall was. The wall was a massive wall that went straight across England to protect the south from what would become Scotland. But at the moment we are nothing but a bunch of tribes that like to raid. But to Julius, it was just some wall. I figured he might be impressed with the sight, but I forgot that a wall like this is nothing compared to the great buildings in Rome. So we ended up just exploring England, going village to village, or anywhere that seemed interesting. It's truly amazing when you are immortal, you never have to hurry around, and you can truly enjoy the simple things in life. Once done with that, we finally made our way home. While walking our horses along one of the Roman roads back south, Julius and I spoke. I still don't know what you see in this place. Even the Germanic tribes would have been a better place for the head bank, Julius said. It's easy really, for one it's not connected to the mainland, making it harder for an invasion to take over the land and our gold. Second, this land is starting to grow and it's not every day you can be with a civilization from the start, giving us the advantage of moving things the way we want easier. Julius was silent for a few moments before he spoke. Now I see why you wanted it here. I don't make choices like this without planning, Julius. I know this is a downgrade from Rome, but only for a few hundred years, then it will become better here, I said while pulling out some grain from a pouch from my waist and start feeding my horse. I know, I just need to readjust to this. For over 100 years I lived like an emperor and now I am living like a commoner. I chuckled at that. It would have gotten old, Julius, everything handed to you on a silver platter, never needing for anything. It takes away the meaning of living. It would have made you go mad. Just look at most of the emperors of Rome. Most of them went mad as soon as they sat on the throne, or those that went mad trying to obtain the throne, killing in cold blood and as many as needed for it, I said while scratching my horse's ear. We live forever, Julius, and sometimes it's good to humble ourselves, to keep that humanity intact. And you just finished your lazy boy a few weeks before we left, you didn't have that in the villa, did you? No, Julius mumbled while picking up rocks with his mind and throwing them into the forest. After a few more minutes of walking, we could hear the sound of rustling in front of us just off the road. Coming to a stop, we looked over to the noise. It was clear to both of us that it was a small group of people. A group of 5 rough-looking men came to stand in the road in front of us. They all had large beards and dirty torn clothes, with more holes than a guilty man's alibi. All of them were also carrying some sort of weapon, from swords to spears. One of them even had a bow. It was clear that these fine respectable gentlemen were bandits. Me and Julius looked at each other and then back at the group of ZZ Top lookalikes and started laughing. Out of all the people to stop and rob, they pick one of the only vampires and an immortal with the ability to crush them like grapes. The group of men stared at each other and back at us, in confusion. Probably wondering if we were crazy. One of the larger men in the group stepped forward. "Give us your horses and anything valuable or we will cut your heads off and leave your body here to rot," he said in a gruff voice. Looking over to Julius, I ask, "Do you want to take care of them or do you want me to do it?" He looks over at me and smiles. "I'll take care of them, I need to get a little anger off my shoulders." Without a second word, Julius attacked the bandits. The tall man that spoke to us didn't even know he died. Julius zoomed in front of him in under a second and punched his fist right through the man's chest. The rest of them only had time to be startled and take a step back before Julius mentally grabbed the weapons out of the bandits' hands. All the while, I held onto our horses' leads while giving him shit from behind him. "Hey, do you know how much your clothes cost? Now look at them, you just got blood all over it," I yell from behind him. "Would you shut it, old man? We have more money than we could spend in a few thousand years," he said, not taking his eyes off of the bandits. "Pfft, that doesn't mean I like to spend it all willy-nilly," I shout back. Of course, I was just trying to mess with him. But he did have a point. We did have enough money to last us practically forever. As I was having that thought, Julius used the weapons to slash and stab at the bandits, who were now huddled in a circle trying and failing to block or dodge his attacks. "Put some effort into it," I yell. Then with a flurry of movement, all the weapons go above the bandits and go vertical. All of the bandits look up at the swords and spears in fear and astonishment. All of the weapons go still and drop right on their faces. It was quite a sight to see. The ones that were hit with swords dropped to the ground with a sword going through their heads, but the ones that got the spears still stood straight, impaled by the spear through the head chest, and out their rears, causing them to stay standing with the help of the spear being dug into the ground. I walk up beside Julius while still leading the horses. We stood there for a moment just looking at the carnage. "That's a first," I say with a chuckle. Julius looks over at me. "When did it become this easy?" he asked. I could hear the concern in his voice. I look over at him. "It doesn't get easier, Julius. Why you don't feel bad for killing them is for the kind of men they are," I say, kicking the dead guy with a hole in his chest. "These men have probably killed a number of innocent people, they didn't deserve to live, but trust me, if you were to kill someone innocent, it wouldn't be so easy." Clapping my hands together to break the somber mood, I say in a happy tone. "Now enough with the somber mood, because I don't know about you, but I am missing my chair and home, so let's get moving." Chapter 27, Finding a Mate. Update. Year 476. Sitting in my comfy chair by the fire, I relaxed as I felt the heat wash over me. At the moment, I was alone in my small home. I sent Julius to Rome, to protect our bank that was in Rome from being plundered. Because at the moment Rome had collapsed and I needed him there to make connections with the powers there to keep the bank safe and still in use. I knew it was going to happen, but I didn't want to change history to a point that it would change the 21st century to a point of it being unrecognizable. That's why I never went to see Jesus. I knew if I had been there I would have stopped him from being crucified. Let's just say he would have never been betrayed. That change alone would have been drastic and could have done more bad than good. Rome did it to themselves when Rome was constantly bringing back slaves. It did nothing but hurt the lower class citizens, and keep them from making money. And making them mostly reliant on slaves. Causing the lower class citizens to riot in the streets. That along with the insane amounts of corruption in the Senate and crime in Rome only helped with its inevitable fall. Getting bored of just sitting in my home all day, I decided to go on a small trip to the west coast to a place I knew had some great views and fishing spots. So, packing up my horse, I headed west. It's honestly amazing to see all the changes that have happened in the last 150 years. Londinium has gone from a small fort city to a large city. Of course, it wasn't even close to what it will become, but it has grown in leaps and bounds. Thankfully my home was a few miles from the city, giving me a few decades before they started to encroach. Going down a well-used path I lost myself in a Joe Rogan podcast I had heard more than 1,000 times. Something they should have built into my Spotify was a connection with my old world so I could get some new stuff. As I walked down the road I watched the trees sway and the birds fly from tree to tree. As Joe Rogan and Elon Musk light up a doobie. At midday, I stopped for lunch, consisting of dried meat and a few vegetables. Packing my belongings I hit the road again. It took me another few days to reach my destination and make camp. Sitting by my fire I watched the flames flicker and change, the wind cascading the glowing embers high above me. It was around 10 o'clock and I was just sitting down under some of my blankets, the fire slowly losing its glow, when something stopped me dead in my tracks. Up above me hundreds of white lines streaked across the night sky. Slowly sitting back up, I watched as the meteors flew across the sky. "Incredible," I said softly to myself. Over the years I had always been drawn to the simpler things in this new life I call mine. Like when I first came here I would do just what I am doing now. Look up at the night sky by my fire and watch as the stars would twinkle and occasionally see a shooting star. Even when I had my villa and more money than the emperors or kings of this world. I would come outside, in the dead of night and just watch the night sky. And a sense of being so small would wash over me as I watched. That even with this whole new life I was still just a small speck of dust on a speck of dust on a masterpiece covered with specks of dust, in a dusty attic. A small smile spread across my face as the last of the shooting stars passed by. I might just be a small speck of dust, but who cares, I'm going to continue living this new life to the fullest, I thought as I laid back down, and continued to watch the dazzling stars above. That night I found the part of me that seemed to be gone. The part of me that had meaning and a purpose, that I seemed to have lost at some point along my long unending walk down life's path. For so long I just seemed to drift from one place to another. I tell myself it's for the adventure, but in reality, it was to just pass the time. Of course, I did enjoy the adventure. But you can only do so for so long before it's more out of habit rather than for the fun of it. Slowly I closed my eyes and wondered what another day would bring. Year 647. "Would you stop that?" I say, not looking away from the old scroll I was currently reading. "Sigh," I heard from Julius. Dropping the scroll to my lap I look over to Julius, who was also reading a scroll in his recliner. "Are you reading one of those sad plays again?" I say, pointing an accusing finger at Julius. What did I tell you about those? Every time you read a new sad play you're Mr. Sad Guy for the next year. So if that's what it is I'm gonna. It's not a play, Adam, Julius says, looking over at me. Then what is it? I say, bringing my scroll back up to continue reading. It's just, how do you do it? I look over at him. Do what I ask. How are you okay with being alone for so long? He asked me as he started to stand. I raise an eyebrow at the question. Are you okay, Julius? I say, dropping my scroll back down. I mean, has the time finally caught up with you? Have you finally gone crazy? Julius looks over at me. What? He asked. You know, you just asked how I'm okay with being alone for so long, but you are clearly standing there in the same room as me, so I'm not alone. Julius looks at me like I am an idiot. That's not what I meant, Adam. I mean a partner. Oh, well, firstly you should word your questions better, and second, it's none of your business, I say, looking away from him. Is it because you like men? Julius asked bluntly. What, you think, that I... Adam, it's fine if you do, but I'm just telling you now, I'm not that kind of guy, so... Would you shut up? I yell. I don't find men to be attractive. I snap. He raised his hands in surrender. In an attempt to change the subject, I ask. What made you ask? Julius started to avoid my eyes and play with a small piece of coal in his hands. For the past few decades, I have been craving for someone, more. Someone to fall in love with, someone who will be there in my darkest days, he said, his voice getting louder with every word. Whoa, slow down there before you start going through that whole acting phase again. I said, standing from my chair. So you want a mate, I say as I wrap my scroll back up and put it on a side table. Oh, what? He asked, confused. Clapping my hands together, I say in my teacher's voice. Buckle up, kid, you are in for a wild ride. What does a buckle have to do with this, and what do you mean a wild ride? Julius asked, more confused than ever. Well, the wild and uncaring world of love, of course. Chapter 28, Jane. Year 700. I don't get it, I really don't get it, Julius said, as he sat on a tree branch of my large beech tree that was next to my home. Looking up, I said. And what did you expect, that you would walk outside and the first person you saw was the one? Of course, I didn't, but 50 years, he said, crossing his arms. Julius, I have been on this earth for thousands of years, and I still haven't found a partner. There's a difference between you and me, and regular humans. We live forever, and if we pick a partner, they are the ones that we will spend the rest of eternity with. That's a very big decision. I yell up at him. The memories of all his failed, attempted courtings ran through my brain. The failed attempts and the blunder he made in his quest for love. But Julius quickly found that any woman that fell in love with him, didn't actually fall in love with him, but instead, they fell in love with the way he looked, with his perfect face and hair, his golden eyes adding to people's fascination and attraction. Thankfully, next year we have a planned trip to visit some small covens I knew about and hopefully find his mate there. Now will you come inside, and stop being Mr. Emo for at least one day? What is an emo? Julius asked, looking down at me. It's a person in constant sorrow, or a person that acts like it to court women. I say, trying to put it into words he would understand. Do you think that would work? He asked, still looking down at me. I couldn't help but chuckle. It only works on the crazy ones, so, kind of. Julius thought about that for a minute, before shrugging his shoulders and leaped off the branch he was sitting on. Julius landed next to me, and we started walking back to my home. As we walked, I saw a man running full speed towards my home. Stopping in front of my home, I waited for the man to reach me. The young man of around 20 stopped in front of me and bent over, panting. After a moment, he caught enough of his breath and finally spoke. Sir, I have a message for you from Mr. Thrack, he said, still trying to catch his breath. Thrack was the man currently in charge of the main bank in Londinium. He was handpicked by his predecessor and approved by me. What is the message? I asked in a hurry. The only time they would send me a message would be if something was really wrong. Normally, if there was a problem, Julius would be the one to deal with it, not that I made him do it, but that he genuinely enjoyed the whole thing. Strange men in red and black cloaks were seen getting off a ship. Mr. Thrack told me you wanted to be told if men that wore them were ever seen. I nodded at him. Yes, thank you. I said, dismissing him with the toss of a gold coin. Turning, I open the door to my home and rush inside. Red and black cloaks, is it the Volturi? Julius asked, following me inside. More than likely, I said, grabbing my sword, and strapping it to my waist. What would they want here? There is nothing here but the Gringotts Bank. Yes, but they aren't here for that, if anything they are here for me. Julius had never met any of the Volturi, and only a handful of vampires. But he knew about them because of the trips I take every few years to check in with the Volturi. Why would they come for you? Julius asked, confused. Who knows? They are led by a man with some serious mental issues, so it could be anything. I say, grabbing my own cloak and putting it on. After getting everything I would need, me and Julius run full speed to the city. At full speed, it only took us 10 minutes to reach the outskirts of the city. And another 15 minutes to figure out that they were already out of the city. Going to Gringotts, I found Thrak in his office. Sitting down in a chair by his desk, I asked. So, some people in black and red cloaks were seen? Yes sir, they were seen leaving a ship this morning. I had over a dozen people tell me about them, how they were the most beautiful people any of them had ever seen. And knowing that you wanted to know if anyone of such discrimination was to show up, to notify you immediately. Yes, that is true, I said, leaning back in the wooden chair. And what direction were they last seen? I asked. They were last seen going north, just leaving the city. How many were in the group? Julius asked. I believe they said 9 of them. I looked over to Julius. It seems they are not here for me. Julius raised an eyebrow. Then what are they here for? I don't know, but that worries me more. Quickly leaving Gringotts, we head north, in the hopes of catching up with them. Running north at full speed. I stretched out my senses, staying alert for any signs of an ambush. We ran for almost an hour before we ran into a small open field. In the middle of the field was a small village. With wooden huts and a muddy road that went right down the middle. I'm going to change a bit of the Twilight history here. So the reason Jane and her brother were burned at the stake was because the people of their village thought they were witches, because the people that were mean or bad towards their family had overly bad luck, but those close to the family had good luck, and that Jane and her brother were outcast among the village. What I'm changing here is that Arrow only takes the male because Jane didn't show any talents as a human, but her brother Bad showed abilities for reading people. But one thing stuck out in the village, and that was the smoke that just started to billow high into the sky. Looking at where the smoke was coming from, I saw 2 large stakes in the ground surrounded by pieces of wood. But what really grabbed my attention was the boy and girl tied to the stakes. My heart dropped. This must be Jane and her brother Alec. As I watched, I saw on the outer rim of the mob of villagers was the Volturi. They stood there as the flames began to lick at Jane and Alec's feet. Their screams sent a shiver down my spine. I have seen death more than anyone alive, but that doesn't mean I like to watch others die horrible deaths. As I was having that thought, the Volturi moved. In a group, they moved forward, pushing the villagers to the side. But something strange happened. They only went toward Alec, leaving Jane to continue screaming as the flames rose higher. Julius, get that girl out of there, I order him as we run full speed towards the fires. Julius lifted his hands and lifted the stake and Jane out of the fire. Stopping by her side, I tear the bindings holding Jane to the stake. Thankfully she was already unconscious, half of her lower body was already burned to a terrible state. Looking over, I saw the villagers running away back to the village while screaming. Standing among the fleeing people stood Arrow. Rock still he stood and stared at Julius, his eyes glinting, as if he found a new toy to add to his collection of rare artifacts. And just past Arrow, I saw one of the Volturi members lean down over Alec and bite into his neck. Looking back at Kias, I saw he was now looking at me. How strange, I heard him whisper. Without another word, and before I could do anything, Arrow and the rest of the Volturi members picked up Alec and started running at full speed away from me. I was about to chase after them and free Alec from the Volturi when I heard Julius call my name. Adam, I need your help, he said as he looked down at the badly burned legs of Jane. I stalled for only a moment before I went to Julius. Jogging over, I crouched down, and checked on Jane. Why didn't they help her as well? I thought. Is this world different from the movie, or did I change the course of this history? I thought as I looked at the burns. I could help her with the burns and keep the infection away, but she wouldn't be able to walk again. The tendons and muscles took too much damage for me to fix. But that's not what I wanted. Jane's ability was too strong to go to waste. Looking up to Julius, I say. Only you can save her now, Julius. If there are any problems with the chapter, please let me know. I wrote this one half asleep and extremely tired, so please leave a comment if you find anything. Thank you. From a very tired bean. Chapter 29, Blood Rage. Putting the Volturi to the back of my mind for now, I looked at Julius. You need to change her, or she will die. I say in a rush. But why? She could survive the burns. Julius asked. Yes, she could, with my help, she can heal, but she will never be able to walk again. The fire burned too much of her leg muscles for her to ever walk again, so we might as well kill her now to end her suffering. I say, looking into his eyes. Are you ready to kill this innocent girl, Julius? I asked him. He looked down at Jane as she lay unconscious, with a furrowed brow. I felt a little bad about making Julius do this, but if she had the same powers that she had in the movie, she would be of great help, and it would take away an asset from the Volturi that they missed. What do I do? He asked. You need to bite her. The venom in your saliva will get into her blood and go through her body, changing her, but that's the easy part. The hard part is when you bite her, her blood will get in your mouth, and that's when you either kill her or save her, I say, still looking him in the eyes. This will be the hardest thing you may ever do, and as soon as you start, I won't be able to stop you unless I break your jaw off. I could see the nervousness in his eyes as he readied himself for what he was about to do. Julius, I say to him. He looked up at me. You have a will stronger than anyone I have ever seen. If there is one person who could do this, it's you. I say in an attempt to bolster his courage. Julius nods his head, and slowly, he grabs Jane's arm and raises it to his mouth. Posing for just a moment, Julius bites down on her wrist. I saw as his eyes went wide and the taste of human blood flooded his mouth. The yellow in his eyes slowly changed color, going from the golden yellow to crimson red. Julius, that's enough. I said to him as I watched his eyes change. But he didn't listen to my words. He was floating in a sea of bliss he had never felt before. A whole new energy filled him the more he drank the sweet bright red blood. Julius, I say in a stern voice. I saw his eyes slightly widen for a split second at my words, but only for a second, before his eyes glazed over, and nothing but the need for human blood filled his mind. You're killing her, Julius. She is going to lose too much blood if you don't stop. I yell. My words seemed to reach him this time, because in a flash he looked right at me, his eyes wide and clear. And with great force Julius opened his mouth, and leaned away from her, but just for a split second before a look of rage came over his face, and in an instant Julius dove for Jane's neck. Acting fast I grabbed him by the neck, and held him in place, but only for a second before Julius sent a wave of telekinetic force at me in an attempt to launch me from them. But what Julius didn't count on was the strength of my grip that I had on his neck. Keeping a hold on Julius, we both went flying back and away from Jane. When the force hit me, it was like being hit by a truck, the pain washing over me for a split second before it numbed. With Julius still in my grip, I turned my body, placing Julius under me and facing away from me, so when we hit the ground he would hit the ground first, and hopefully get him out of his blood rage. What I didn't count on was Julius using the same telekinetic wave he used on me on the ground to launch us back into the sky. Flipping around in the sky at around 50 feet from the ground, Julius grabbed the hand that I still had on his neck and squeezed, breaking the bones in my hand, and pulling my hand away from his neck. Julius, you need to get a hold of yourself, or I won't have a choice and I will need to hurt you, I yelled into his ear. Shut up! Julius roared, and in a flash Julius raised both hands behind his head and grabbed onto my tunic, in an attempt to throw me from his back. Knowing what he was going for, I wrapped my arms and legs around his waist and torso. When Julius pulled, all he did was rip off the top of my shirt. Looking over Julius's head I could see we are only 30 feet from the ground now, and plummeting back down fast. Wanting to end this now, I grabbed Julius's arms. Holding him with my legs wrapped around his waist so we don't separate mid-air, I grabbed his arms, which were still trying to grab me, and placed them to his side and wrapped my arms around him and clasped my hands together so he can't get loose. Then moving our weight around, I angle us straight down, then as fast as I can, I separate my legs from his waist and put my hands under his arms and pushed him as hard as I could, launching him head first to the ground. By the time I launched him, we were only a few feet from the ground, not giving him time to build up his telekinetic pushes. Julius hit the ground hard, a small boom echoing out, when he hit. Flipping around, I put my feet under me and landed a second later. I had to wait for my legs to heal back up, before moving again. Once I felt the pain wash away, and felt that my legs weren't in pieces anymore. I stood and ran to Julius's prone figure. Stopping next to him, I looked down at him. Cracks ran down his face and neck, and his arm was at a weird angle. Slowly Julius's eyes opened and slowly he looked around, then at me. Adam, what happened? Julius asked as he looked down at his cracked figure. I crouched down and smiled at him. You, my friend, went through something called a blood rage. I figured that out on my own, but what about her, is she dead? Julius asked me, now looking away from me. Looking back I saw Jane still laying still on the ground, her chest no longer rising and falling. Well, of course she's dead. I say to him with a chuckle. Julius's head whipped around, and he looked up at me, his eyes wide. I killed her, he asked. Yup. I say, trying my hardest not to laugh at him. Julius's eyes go wide in panic, as he slowly sits up. I killed an innocent girl, he stammered. Not able to hold it in anymore, I burst out laughing. Julius, you dope, you need to die to become a vampire, the venom stops the heart, then the rest of her will change. I say, bending over just to breathe, as tears roll down my face. Getting a hold of myself a few moments later, I put out a hand to help him stand. Once Julius was standing, I helped him put his arm back in place, then looked over my shoulder. I could see some of the male villagers standing at the edge of the village with spears in hand, ready, if we were to attack them. I'm sure there was more at first, but after they saw me and Julius fight, more than one probably ran away, leaving the bravest behind. We should get going, these villagers have seen enough crazy shit for the day. Yes, that's a good idea, Julius says as he dusts himself off. Oh, and Julius, I spoke as we started walking towards Jane. Yeah, Julius asked. You're paying for my tunic, I say, looking down at my shirt, which was now around my waist. Julius looked over at me, and said. You are such a cheap person. He said, shaking his head. No, I'm responsible with my money, you tore it, so you're paying for it. If I tore it I would have paid for it, but I didn't, so you're paying for it. You have over 80% of the world's money in your banks, making you mountains of gold, but you're not willing to pay for a simple tunic. Julius said, shaking his head. Digging into his money purse, Julius takes out a good coin and hands it to me. Why, thank you very much, sir, for your kindness, sir, I say, doing a playful bow, as I took the gold from his hand. Chapter 30, A Talk and a Wake Up. We ended up stealing a small cart and a horse to transport Jane back to our home, or I wouldn't call it stealing. I left a small pouch of gold for the horse and cart, well over the price originally paid for it. Why I say steal is because I didn't ask, I just took it. As we traveled down one of the old mud and dirt roads, Julius decided to speak for the first time since we left. What was the Volturi doing here? I know they try to avoid you, but for them to come all the way here, and then take a boy being burned at the stake, it just doesn't make sense. Julius said as he led the horse on. Standing on the other side of the horse, I answered his question. I don't know, I think the only one that can answer that question is her, but still that was a big overstep on their part. And it's not a good sign either. If they are willing to push on my boundaries I have set with them, that means they are getting confident, and that might make them do something stupid. Of course I knew why they came here, and that was for Jane and Alec, but what I didn't know was why they only took Alec and left Jane behind. I'm certain they came here for the one thing the Volturi's leader Arrow loves more than anything, and that's to add to his collection of unique vampires. Julius looks over the horse at me. But neither of them were vampires. That's true, but there is a chance they had abilities before they were changed. Arrow probably got wind that certain individuals here had unique abilities, and came to investigate himself, but when he got here he saw they were being burned alive, so taking a chance he took one of them and changed him in the hope that his abilities will be useful and powerful when he becomes a vampire. I said, grabbing a stick that was on the side of the road. So he was willing to come all the way here and fight you, just for someone with abilities? Julius asked me. Of course he was. Did you see how many vampires he came with? There were over 12 of them, and if I had to guess, they were some of his strongest ones, but what he didn't count on was you. I said, looking over at Julius. Me? He asked. Yup, he knows I'm strong, and that I have been alone for over the 1,000 years that he's know of me, and out of nowhere I now have a companion. The odds that you are very strong is a certainty, and the facts that you have gold eyes, probably threw him off, and made him rethink attacking me when he saw me. Is that why you never wanted me to meet them, and keep me away from them? Julius asked. Yes, Arrow is a person who seeks power above everything, and he sees the way to power is to have the most powerful under his command or at times control, and if he knew what your power was he would go to great lengths to have you. But that would never happen, they are cold-blooded murderers. Julius said. The disgust was clear in his voice. I look over to him. Julius, you are strong, probably one of the strongest living vampires, but there are vampires that have abilities that can mess with your mind, and you would never even know it. They can alter your loyalties, making me the bad guy and them gods in your eyes. He looks over at me, a worried look on his face. The first time I met the Volturi, they tried to do that to me. The only problem is, it didn't work, but it would work on you, or I think it could. You are very strong-willed, so you might be able to fight it, but I'm not sure. I said, swinging my stick at the shrubbery on the side of the road. Why do you even tolerate them? You could have killed them all when you first met them. Julius asked me. The vampire world needs rules, and that's what the Volturi bring to the vampires. That's why I hate the Romanian coven so much. At the moment the Romanian coven is the ruling vampiric coven, and they let their vampires murder entire villages with no consequences, no rules, murdering hundreds or thousands because they think they are gods among men. But the Volturi, they have rules, like keeping the vampire world hidden from regular humans, and to only drink and kill those who nobody will notice if they went missing, or were found dead on the side of the road. A necessary evil. I finished. After a few more hours of travel we finally arrived at my home. The small stone structure, a comfort to see. Parking the wagon by the front door I pick up Jane from the back and bring her inside, laying her on my bed. I cracked the door open and walked into my sitting room, and did as the room's name implies, and sat down in my lazy boy, letting out a groan of comfort as I fell into the comfortable chair. A moment later, Julius comes in and sits in his chair. The room fell into silence for a few moments. What now? Julius asked. I look over at him. What do you mean? I asked. I mean, what do we do about the new member of our group? He asked. I sat for a moment, thinking of what to do. I knew that Jane would be different than Julius, her hate for humans could be a problem, and that it would be harder to get her to drink animal blood instead of human blood. I think we will do the same thing I did with you. I say, pulling the lever on the side of my chair, and bringing up the leg part of my chair. As soon as she wakes we will take her north and away from any village or settlement, and get her on animal blood, but that may be harder to do, than it was with you. I say. Julius looks over at me. Why would it be harder? Well, let me ask you this, if you and your little brother were being burned at the stake, would you have a problem with humans? Julius raised an eyebrow. I see where you're going with this, and I can see how she might have a hate for people. Julius said. All we can do for her is try and help her, get her to change her view of humans, that not all of them are like that. And plus, all of them will be dead within the next 40 years. But before I could finish speaking. Creak, boom. Standing to my feet, I only had seconds to avoid a blurring figure that was heading right for me. As I moved to the right, the blurring figure of Jane crashed right into my lazy boy. Pieces of wood and animal furs went everywhere, as my most beloved possession was destroyed right in front of my eyes. My mouth was agape as I stared at the pieces of my chair that lay scattered everywhere. Looking up I had to dodge the blurred arm that was launched towards my head. But instead of dodging, I grabbed the arm mid-swing, my other hand shoots out and grabs Jane by the neck, and I lift her off the ground, my 6'3" figure dwarfing Jane's 5'4". Do you know how long it took me to get that chair perfect? I yelled at her. Her eyes now wide with fear, as she stared at me, and tried her hardest to get out of my grip. I mean really, I just got a perfect butt imprint and everything. I yelled. Shaking her hard enough to break a normal person's neck. I don't think I had been this mad in almost 900 years. And I was ready to end Jane now, her powers be damned. Adam, calm down, you can make another one, it's not like you don't have forever to do it. Julius said, grabbing my arm. I look over at him. But Julius, it was perfect. I whined. He looked at me, like I was stupid. Let her down, you geezer. He said. I stared at him for a moment, going over the idea of just breaking her head off, then reattaching it for payback for breaking my chair, but after a moment I figured it wasn't worth having Julius nagging at me. Fine, I said, letting go of her neck, causing her to fall to the ground like a sack of potatoes. Chapter 31, What am I? Stepping away from Jane, I crossed my arms, and tapped my foot, as she sat up, and looked up at me and Julius, her eyes blood red, and the snarl on her face feral. "Oh, would you relax, we're not going to hurt you," I say, the bitterness clear in my voice. "Who are you, the both of you?" she practically yells out, causing her to cover her ears at her loud voice. "What is happening to me?" she says loudly, just not a scream like before. I look over at Julius with a raised eyebrow. "You should tell her," I say, gesturing with my hands at Jane. "Why should I do it? You are the one that told me to change her." Holding the bridge of my nose, I let out a long sigh. "Fine," I say, annoyed. Looking back down at Jane, who was still sitting on the floor, I say, "Could you stand up? I need to clean up the mess you made out of my favorite chair," I said while waving a shooing hand at her. Jane looked down, at the pieces scattered around, "That used to be my chair," then back up at me. "What happened to me?" Jane said, ignoring my request. I sighed again. When did people start to get so annoying? I mumbled under my breath, but forgot that no matter how softly I spoke, both Jane and Julius could still hear me. "Adam, you can't blame her, she has no idea of what has happened to her, it's only natural that she would be confused and afraid," Julius said, from behind me and to my left. I took in a deep breath and held it for a few moments, before puffing it back out. "You're right, I'm just upset about my chair," I said, turning my head to look at Julius. Turning back to Jane, I crouched down and looked her in the eyes. "First, what's your name?" I asked in my best customer service voice. Even though I knew what her name was, I didn't want to magically know her name and make Julius suspicious of me, which I constantly have to do nowadays, because I constantly forget that Julius might look like a 17-year-old, but in reality he's almost 500 years old, and had a knack for picking up on my words. After the split second it took me to run that through my mind, I came back to reality just in time for Jane to speak. "My name is Jane," she said, now seeming to have calmed down a little. Putting my hand out, I say, "Hello Jane, my name is Adam Gray," I say, with a small smile on my face. Tentatively, Jane puts her hand in mine, and we shake. Pointing over my shoulder at Julius, I say, "And he is Julius." As we shake hands, I see Jane's eyes move from my eyes to my neck, where she stares at the pulse on my neck, causing her to open her mouth and move closer to me, instinctually. Using my free hand, I bring it up in front of her face and snap my fingers a few times, to break her out of her bloodlust stupor. Blinking a few times, she looked back up at me, as we removed our hands. "Before anything, you need to feed," I say, standing to my feet. Looking over to Julius, I ask him, "You should lead us to your normal hunting grounds, and away from any people. The last thing we need is for her to go after some lost villagers," I say as I walk towards the door. As I reached the door, I looked back over my shoulder, and saw Julius help Jane to her feet, the both of them staring into each other's eyes. His mix of gold and crimson red and her pure blood red. Turning around to face them, I clap my hands together, loud enough to break them from each other's stare. "Let's get a move on," I said briskly. "I would like to get her back before daybreak," I say, staring at Julius. "Last thing she needs is to run into a regular human, and for her to get a taste for human blood," I thought, as I turned back to the door, and opened it. Stepping outside, I looked up and at the night sky as Julius and Jane stepped out after me. "What is this pain in my throat?" Jane asked, as she put a hand to her neck. Before I could speak, Julius cut me off. "It's your thirst," he said. Looking down, I looked at Julius. "What happened to you? Told me to change her so she's your responsibility," I asked Julius. Julius just shrugged his shoulders, and smiled at me. "My thirst?" Jane asked. "Yes, you need blood," Julius said as he looked down at Jane. "Blood?" Jane asked, with furrowed brows. "Yes, blood," Julius said, not explaining more. "We will explain everything after you feed, it will help focus you, and keep you from being distracted while we explain everything to you," I say, turning to Julius. "Which way?" I asked him. Julius pointed north. "About a 5-minute run north, there is some thick woods that has a good number of deer and other animals." "Good," I say, as I turn back to Jane, who was standing barefoot, next to Julius. I didn't even see her get close to him. When we came out she was at least 3 feet from him, but now was standing inches from his arm. I stared at her for a moment, but decided not to say anything, and instead decided to just watch them closely. Not that it was a bad thing, in fact if they became mates that would be great, but not this soon. Because at the moment Jane was still in a sort of euphoria, from the human blood still in her system. But as soon as she is out of it, she could be a completely different person. Images of the cold, and uncaring version of Jane that was in the movie came to the front of my mind. The one that hated humans with every fiber of her being. If Julius was her mate, he might be the counterweight for Jane, the one who keeps her on the right path, I thought. I'm sure at the moment she hates humans for what they did to her and her brother, but not as much as was shown in the movies. Because I'm sure, without a doubt, that the Volturi helped add wood to her fire of hatred. And hopefully, without their influence on her she might become a different person to the one in the movies. All of these thoughts ran through my mind in seconds. Breaking from them, I looked at Julius. We will need to take it slow, she is still getting used to her new strengths. I say. Looking at Jane, I say. You feel different, don't you? I asked her. Jane nodded her head at my question but didn't say anything. That's because of what we had to do to you, to keep you alive. I say, gesturing to me and Julius. I don't understand, Jane said, looking between me and Julius. That's understandable. I say with a chuckle. My words and chuckle only caused Jane to furrow her brows. Jane, you are no longer human. I say, looking Jane in the eyes. What she said. Have you noticed since you woke up that you no longer have a heartbeat, or a real need to breath? I asked her. Jane froze for a moment, as she brought her hand up and placed it on her chest, in search of a beat she wouldn't find. Or how you were able to do what you did inside of my home. I continued. You ran through a wooden door, then in a blur of speed, you ran at me and destroyed my chair, which was made of thick wood, and you didn't even feel a thing. I added. Could a regular human do that? I asked her. Jane was frozen in place as the memories of what she did ran through her brain. After a moment, she looked up at me and asked the most important question. Then what am I? She asked. With a smile on my face I say. A vampire. Chapter 32, Lost in Thought. Sitting by my small campfire, I watched as Julius and Jane exchanged blows in their fast-paced fight. The both of them moving faster than any human eye would be able to follow. But my eyes didn't miss a thing, from any wasted motion, or mistaken foot placement, my eyes could see it perfectly. As I watched, my mind started to drift. It had only been a month since we turned Jane into a vampire, and let me tell you, holy shit. The girl was a firecracker, with some serious anger issues, mostly towards humans, and the Volturi. Human because of the fact that her village almost burned her and her brother to death for the simple fact that they thought they were witches. I know, how medieval of them. But to be fair, witches and demons were a real fear in our current time, causing people to do some pretty stupid stuff while in a state of mass hysteria. Second, she hated the Volturi for leaving her to die, and taking her only living family. And I didn't even need to try and persuade her into hating them. She hated them for the fact that they left her behind when they had the chance to save her as well. Allowing me to mold her into a better person, and to add wood to her fire of hatred she had for the Volturi. Even though she still had some serious issues with humans, I try my best to show her the best in humanity. Even though our current time isn't the best era to try and show someone the good in humanity. I mean, if I was to go to any village or city, the odds of finding a starving person on the side of the road begging for scraps was very high. Oh, and just finding a dead body on the side of the road was also high, so yet, not the best time. And the fact that England was in constant wars with itself, with self-proclaimed kings, I think 7 in total, who massed armies, to go to war with each other on a yearly basis as proclaimed kings chosen by God, causing the death of thousands of people every year, which also didn't help. So, yet. But I was working on it, because even in the worst of times, there is still good. At the moment Christianity was starting to grow in England, slowly becoming the biggest religion in England, causing people to become more caring to the less fortunate, but only slightly. Just then Julius landed a hard kick to Jane's chest, rocketing her back, where she hit a tree, causing chunks of wood to break from the tree. Clapping my hands together I say. Nice hit, Julius, go check on her, I think we've had enough for today, once she's up, take her hunting. Julius nods his head at me, then zooms to where Jane landed, and is now slowly sitting up. As Julius helped her to her feet, they began to talk. I ignored their conversation, and delivered back into my mind as I waited for them to come back from their hunt. Something new that also happened, was that Jane and Julius became almost inseparable. they were constantly in each other's company, either talking, reading or just enjoying each other's company. Which I guess is good. I'm just happy that they were taking it slow. Because I knew from that first day when they were locked in each other's eyes, that they were destined to become each other's mate. I had a few conversations with Julius about his feelings towards Jane, and all it ended up doing was making him blush and avoid the question. I didn't even know vampires could blush. But just the way they talked or looked at each other told me their feelings for each other quite clearly. The only guess I could come up with for why they weren't already together was because of the fact that Jane was still trying to get used to her new life as a vampire. And knowing Julius and his compassionate side, I knew he was willing to wait forever for Jane. Often when seeing them together would send my heart to aching for the lack of love I felt. Of course me and Julius care for each other like brothers, and that helped numb the longing I felt, but it could only do so for so long. But something told me, just a little longer. It was like a voice in the back of my head, that would whisper those words, whenever the feeling would bear its head. Helping me manage the feeling. Pushing that train of thought to the back of my mind, before I got consumed by it. I started to think about my next move. Now that the Volturi had Jane's brother Alec, they should be ready to finally fight the Romanian coven. With Alec's abilities and the army of vampires with abilities under the Volturi's control, they would be getting ready to fight. The only thing keeping them from doing so now, was that they still needed to train Alec in fighting as a vampire and how to use his abilities. Just like what I was doing for Jane. Something I found out about Jane was her affinity for combat, which surprised me. In the movie, she only relied on her mental ability to cause extreme pain to others, but from what she has shown in her fights with Julius was that she could fight, and fight well. Of course she still couldn't beat me or Julius yet, but she was getting better every day that her and Julius fought. In her training I had given Julius the lead, allowing him to train her in most aspects, from fighting to self-control lessons. With me watching from the side to give him instructions on what he could do better, or what he should teach her first. Me doing this also caused Jane to underestimate me. In the first week, Jane thought it was a good idea to challenge me to a fight. I can't blame her for her confidence, which she seemed to lack none of, causing her to be overconfident. To her I was just a human with certain abilities like my ability to run as fast as a vampire. Which at the time was the only ability she had seen me do when I went with her the first time she went hunting, but she also saw my need for human food, as well as sleep, and she could hear my beating heart, causing her to think I would be an easy opponent, that could just run fast. I guess the idea of a human with abilities wasn't that outlandish, in a world where vampires exist as well as the shapeshifters. To her great dismay, it only took me 2 moves to nearly kill her. Which also surprised me. All I did was kick her in her side, causing her to go flying, then unconsciously, I chased after her, catching her mid-air then throwing her to the ground. My kick and my unconscious actions nearly broke Jane into pieces, surprising me and Julius. Never before had I done something I didn't consciously do, as well as the power I had put behind my kick and throw was stronger than I even thought I was capable of doing. But I also remembered that I was getting stronger the longer I lived. And the last time it was obvious was almost 500 years ago. By my guess I was a little over 2 times stronger than a regular vampire, maybe as strong as 3 vampires. Making it hard for myself to train with Julius. It was no longer a challenge to fight him, because now he seemed to move slower to me, allowing me more openings to hit. Switching subjects in my mind, I thought of Jane's powers. It didn't take long for Jane to use her powers for the first time. It was actually on the first day of being a vampire that she used her powers. It was by accident, when she was telling us the story that led to her and her brother being burned alive at the stake, and the pain she felt. When she said the word pain and the memory of the pain she felt ran through her mind, she was looking right at Julius, and the pain hit him hard, dropping him to the ground, writhing in pain. The feeling of being burned alive washed over him. It answered a question I had, and that was that she had the same powers that she had in the movies. For the next week we tested her powers, on a few really bad guys me and Julius kidnapped to be our own little test mice. We never killed them, but by the time we were done, they were nothing more than shells of their previous selves. It might not have been the most ethical thing to do, but we took the worst of the worst that me and Julius could find, which made it easier when we made them live through a mental attack that felt like you were burning alive. It was also a way to help Jane deal with the anger she felt towards humans. But if me and Julius weren't there to keep her from killing them, every last one of them would have been torn to pieces, because of her pure bloodlust she still had when around normal humans and just her pure hate she currently had for humans. Something we found out is that Jane's power doesn't work on me. My guess is that any abilities that are supposed to mess with my mind won't work on me, just like when the Volturi tried to make me loyal to them by using mind manipulation that one of Arrow's vampires can do. Any mental ability that might mess or interfere with the computer chip that was embedded in my brain, by an alien civilization that travels different multiverses wouldn't work. The chip blocks any interference from mental intrusions. Like Jane's mental fire. Or any abilities that mess with the mind. And it should also be able to block Jane's brother's ability. Which should be some sort of sensory illusion. Where he can take away all of your senses, like touch, smell, vision, and hearing. Making you a perfect target to attack. Just then I could hear the fast footsteps of Jane and Julius returning for their hunt. Looking up from the fire, I had been staring in while lost in thought. I saw the both of them joking with each other, and for the first time since I had met her, Jane had a smile on her face instead of the cold look she tended to have. The both of them walked side by side to the small fire I was sitting at, where they stopped and looked at me. "Are you ready to go or what?" Julius asked me. I looked up at him. "Not yet," I said, as I used a stick to move some of the burning logs around in the fire. Not looking up at them I say. "The both of you should take a seat, I need to talk to the both of you." Looking at each other, Julius just shrugs and takes a seat on the other side of the fire from me, Jane following a second later. I didn't say anything for a moment and continued to stare into the fire. After a few more moments, I look up at the both of them and say, "I think it's almost time that the both of you come with me to meet the Volturi." Chapter 33, Anger. "Wait, you want us to meet the Volturi?" Julius asked. "Yes I do, but not yet, maybe in a few months to a year, preferably when Jane has more control over herself," I say, pointing the stick I was using in the fire at Jane, who just raised an eyebrow at me, her smile gone, and the cold emotionless mask back in place. "Why now?" Julius asked. "Well, if the Volturi were willing to come here, where they knew I lived, and practically take a shit in my garden while looking me in the eyes, then run away, means they are getting bold, and if they are getting bold that means they are getting stronger, and are at a point in power where they believe they can start applying their power to do as they wish, without the fear of repercussions, which means they are about to get ready to fight the Romanian coven." Julius slowly nodded his head, with a thoughtful look on his face, as he went over my words. Julius opened his mouth to ask a question, but was cut off by Jane. "The Romanian coven?" Jane asked. "Yes, the Romanian coven," Julius says in an offhand manner. Then he opened his mouth to ask me another question, but was cut off again. "Who is the Romanian coven?" Jane asked, this time looking at me. "The Romanian coven is the current ruling vampiric coven." "Vampires have rulers?" Jane asked, tilting her head to the side slightly. It was my idea to keep Jane away from the political world that the vampires have. In an attempt to keep her mind more focused on her training, because the first year of being a vampire, they tend to be very unstable, mentally, and in their ability to control themselves around humans and their blood. Things were starting to move in the vampire world, and fast, and now I had a choice either to tell her or not. Of course I told her about the Volturi, but I didn't tell her about the other covens spread across the known world. And now that the war with the Romanian coven seemed to be coming closer, I had no choice but to tell her, to prepare her for what to expect and what will likely happen. Yes, the vampires have ruling covens, at the moment it's the Romanian coven, and the Volturi are about to go to war with them in hopes of taking the throne for ruling coven. Jane looked past me, with a thoughtful expression on her face at my words. "The Romanian coven are the worst of the worst, they kill humans in cold blood and for no reason, other than the fact that they think that they are gods among men," I say, looking back down at the fire in front of me, the memories of the people I tried to help flashing through my mind. "The Romanian coven doesn't sound like such a bad coven to me," Jane said, in an uncaring tone. Julius froze at her words and so did I. Julius's eyes flashed to me as he watched me, looking to see if I would do something to Jane. The anger her words caused in me was like an ocean of hate and rage, unleashed from the depths of my mind where they laid chained, to break free and come flooding to the surface. They didn't even see me move. Unconsciously my body reacted, and before I or the others knew what was happening I had Jane by the neck, and lifted almost a foot off the ground, by the neck. I stared Jane dead in the eye, the normal jovial spark to my eyes was gone, now they were as cold as ice, as I looked into her soul. "How heartless have you become?" I said in a cold tone. "Where the people who murder innocent people doesn't sound so bad." I asked Jane, daring her to answer. "They have killed untold thousands of innocent people, for the fact that they wanted to." Entire villages, massacred to the last infant, because a group of vampires wanted to. I said, my voice slowly rising, as my grip grew stronger on her neck. You hate humans for what they did to you and your brother, and you have a right to hate people, but only hate the village that tried to kill you, not the entire species, because of a group of people who will be dead in a few decades while you stay the same. I yelled at her. Jane's eyes were now round in fear, as my anger increased. I tried to save some of them once, you know, I said, now in a quieter voice. And I managed to do so a few times, moving a few villages to the far north, but once the Romanian coven found out what I was doing, they amassed a large group of vampires to track me down, and kill me. There was too many of them to fight, so I ran. Of course they couldn't catch me, but they made me pay for my actions, by killing a whole village of innocent people, as I watched from a distance. Back then I was weak and afraid, and I couldn't save them because of it, and even now there is only so much I can do on my own. That's why I need the Volturi, but for you to say the death of innocent people is okay is disgusting and so hypocritical it make me sick, I said to her. You stand on your high ground, acting like they were in the right for killing them, like their lives never mattered, because your life almost came to an end by a group of villagers who were afraid, which you thought gave you the right to hate every breathing person to exist. Adam, you need to calm down. Julius said, zooming to my side and placing a hand on the arm that was holding Jane up. I looked over at him, causing him to flinch at what he saw. What he saw was the part of me I was able to push down, far enough to forget. Using my emotion dampeners, I was always able to push them down in a way, but never able to destroy them. With Jane's words, she was able to bring them to the front. And now I looked at Julius with the eyes of a person who has seen more death than any living being alive, a man who has seen the collapse of nations, wars, plagues, and thw constant death of his friends, one by one. The real immortal. Julius took a step back at my stare. He knew, if I was to attack him, I wouldn't hold myself back like I normally did. Looking back at Jane, I saw the fear in her eyes as she stared back at me, with her half gold and red eyes. You have more than a right to hate that village for what they did to you and your brother, but that doesn't give you the right to hate all humans. I am thousands of years old and I have seen the darkest side of humanity more times than I can count, giving me more of a right to hate them than you, but I have also seen the good in humanity as well. I say, my voice almost a whisper. By this point I was able to get my emotions pushed back down and under lock, at least enough to where I wasn't going to kill the both of them. And after taking a few more calming breaths, I slowly lowered Jane back to the ground. And something happened to me, for the first time I could remember since I came to this world. Tears began to slowly fall from my eyes, and run down my face. At first I was a little shocked to feel them fall. Bringing my hand up to my face, I wiped away the tears that continued to fall freely. Alert! Recalibration of emotion inhibitors needed. Self-diagnoses activated. Loading, 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 error. Overload of emotional dampeners detected. Said a robotic voice in my head. Recalibration needed. Loading new parameters for recalibration. Loading, 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 error. New parameters for emotional overload not found. Self-calibration activated. Activation of basic self-AI readjustment parameters activated. Starting adjustments now. With those last words, everything went black and I became weightless, floating in a black abyss. Chapter 34, Talking, Part 1. Floating in the abyss was a strange experience. It was like I was floating in a completely dark piece of space, with no stars to be seen, just a completely dark space. With no ability to move, see, hear, or feel anything. So, while floating aimlessly, I thought about what I had just done. I had let my emotions take control of my actions. Of course it was a reasonable response to what Jane had said, but since I had come here, to this world, I had never had such a reaction to something. No matter how angry or sad I got, I was always able to stay calm and reasonably in control of myself. In any situation, I could act how I wanted and not on pure emotions. But from what I gathered from the system, was that the full attack of all of my emotions at once overwhelmed the dampeners, bringing the full brunt of my emotions at once, to the front. Emotions I only felt a quieter of before, I had felt it all at once and in full. I had finally pushed down too many bad memories, that my emotional dampeners couldn't dampen them all when they came out, and when they came to the surface, the dampeners were overwhelmed. Which didn't surprise me. The memories of massacres, and the death of untold amounts, that I had seen, and pushed down, had finally come to the surface in a wave of force. Normally, Only 1 or 2 bad memories would come to the surface at a time, which was manageable, but this time, every single bad memory I could remember, rushed up and out of the dark corner I hid them, overloading the dampeners. As I had that thought, I got the sensation that I was moving. Unable to see anything, or do anything about it, I just went with it. The sensation of moving got faster and faster, until eventually it felt like I was moving at light speed, then with a jolt, it came to a complete stop, and the feeling of weight came back to me, as well as the rest of my senses, all at once. Jolting upright, I looked around, and found myself in my room. I was panting hard, and a cold sweat glistened on my forehead. I was in my bed, which was surrounded by scrolls, shelves full of hundreds of scrolls and texts I had collected over the years. Next to my bed was a lit candle on the side table. The candle was half burned out, with its flickering light casting a warm and radiant glow, to gracefully dancing on the walls. Looking down at myself, I saw, I was only in my trousers, my tunic and shoes were gone. Standing from my bed, I walked to the latched window that was on one side of my room. Unlatching the piece of wood that held the wooden shutters closed, I opened the shutters. Once open, I could see the night sky, with sparkling stars and the moon hanging high in the night sky. I guess I'm back to normal, I thought as I checked my mental state, and couldn't feel anything out of the ordinary. I even checked my system screen, but didn't find any message or note, to tell me if I had been fixed. Closing, and relatching the shutters, I went to my door and opened it. My bedroom was connected to the main sitting room, where the large fireplace was, as well as my chairs. Peeking my head out of the door, I saw Julius sitting in his chair reading a scroll. When he heard the door open, he looked over and saw me. In a flash, Julius was out of his chair and in front of me. "Adam, are you all right?" he asked in a rush. I nodded my head at his words. "I'm fine, Julius. How long have I been out?" I asked him, cutting him off before he could ask any more questions. "Only a few hours. You fainted in the woods, so I had to carry you back here," he said, a look of concern on his face. Looking past Julius's and around the room, I didn't see Jane, which was strange. Normally I could always find her close to Julius. Looking at Julius, I asked him, "Where is Jane?" Julius let out a small sigh. "She is out front. I tried to get her to come inside, but she refuses to come in," he said, looking at the front door. "My guess is that she feels ashamed for what she said today. It took you nearly killing her and telling her the hard truth, which we had been avoiding doing until she was on a more stable mental ground, to do so, to finally realize how morbid and cold-hearted she had become," he said, looking back at me. Slowly nodding my head, I asked him, "Has she said anything to you?" Julius shook his head. "She won't even look me in the eyes, let alone talk to me," he said. "I'm going to go talk to her," I said, taking a step back to enter my room. "I don't think that is a good idea," Julius said, as he followed me into my room, as I put on a new tunic, then my shoes. "And why is that?" I asked him, while putting my shoes on. "Adam, you scared her today, you scared me as well," he said, his voice becoming quieter. I looked up at him, stopping what I was doing. "That look in your eyes today, it was a look I had never seen before, a look as cold as ice and as deadly as death itself," he said, not looking me in the eyes. "Julius, look at me," I said, in the quiet room. Slowly, Julius looked over at me. "That part of me, Julius, is the part of me I buried deep down, and tried to forget. I'm sure you yourself have seen things that you have buried in the back of your mind, to be forgotten," I asked him. Julius slowly nodded his head at my words. "That's the downside of our lives, our never-ending lives. It's that we will see things that scare us, people we know dying, wars, plagues, all of it we must watch while we stay young for the rest of eternity, unmarred by the passage of time, without the fear of death, but covered in mental scars that can run as deep as the ocean," I say, standing to my feet. And today, the thousands of years of scars and bad memories I buried, came to the surface. Julius now looked me in the eyes. "I'm sorry, Julius, for my actions today," I continued. "I guess her words brought up some bad memories and I acted on the rage they made me feel. They were the catalyst that unleashed all of my buried memories," I said softly. Julius stared at me for a moment before a small smile crept onto his face. "I forgive you, old man," he said, giving my shoulder a small punch. Patting him on the shoulder, I finished getting dressed, before speaking to him again. I'm going outside, do you want to come with me? I think you, being there, will help her with what I need to say to her. Julius nodded his head. Yes, I will come with you. Stepping past Julius, I walked to the front door, with Julius right behind me. Opening the wooden front door to my home, I took a step outside, the late night cold air, brushing its cold breeze on my face. As soon as I stepped out, I was able to see Jane sitting under the large beech tree that swayed in the night air by my house. She sat there in the dark, staring up at the stars, overhead. She never looked down, as me and Julius walked towards her. Stopping a few feet from her, I didn't say anything, and sat down in front of her, while Julius sat next to her, close enough for his shoulder to almost touch hers. Looking up at the night sky, I spoke. It's a beautiful night, isn't it? I asked her, my soft voice loud in the quiet night. Jane slowly lowered her head, avoiding my eyes. Jane, we need to speak. I said softly. Jane again didn't say anything. I'm not mad at you. I said, my words like thunder, in Jane's ears. Jane's eyes snapped to my face. And as her eyes met mine, I could see the fear in them. The same fear I saw, when I was ready to snap her neck into dust. The vulnerability, the regret, and the sadness she held inside. It made me feel ashamed for my actions. Yes, her words were anything but right, but at the same time, she also had scars from her human life. Where it was only her and her brother against the whole village who thought they were witches, and the same day their mother died, the villagers tied them to poles then set them on fire. I need to apologize for what I did today. I said. Of course we both made mistakes today, but I should have handled it better, and never put your life in danger like I did. Jane shook her head, at my words. No, it's my fault, I should have never said what I said, you were right, I have no right to hate humans, and that the death of innocent people is a terrible thing. I am just so confused on how I should feel. She said, looking back up at the night sky. I want to hate them so much, every last one of them, or, I did. Jane looked back at me. But what you said was true, I shouldn't hate them all, just the ones from my village. It's just any time I think of regular people, I think of them, and I fight with myself, trying not to hate everyone. I nodded my head at her words. They hated us for the fact we were different, made it impossible to survive, where nobody was willing to give us jobs, and when our mother got ill, nobody would help us. She said, her words getting angrier. And then the same day she died, they came for us, and tried to burn us alive, for the simple fact that we were different, they didn't even let us bury her. She said with a sob. Julius slowly lifted one of his arms and put it around Jane's shoulder. Jane all but clung to him, her sobs echoing, in the now still night air. We were quiet for a few moments, before Jane spoke again. And when I woke up, I found that my brother, one of the only things I had left, had been taken by a group of vampires, and that they left me behind to be burned alive, even though they had a chance to save me as well, and that I am now one of them. I just couldn't handle all the emotions I was having, so I turned it all to hate. Jane finished, and never once moved away from Julius. It's natural to feel anger, I told her. But it's important that you don't take your anger out on others, like I did today. I said, scratching my head sheepishly. It only ever ends up doing damage to the undeserving, and yourself. I said. There is never a winner, only losers. Chapter 35, Talking, Part 2. With my words, came a gust of cold air that made the beech tree sway with the wind. The sound of its leaves sounded louder than normal, while sitting under it. After a moment to let the leaves quiet down, I spoke again. You may be something besides human now, but you still have human emotions, you still feel happy, you can feel sad, and you can feel hatred. There are things you will see, that will make you feel those emotions, from the pointless death of people, who did nothing but try to survive, but died, because of someone's idea of peace, by taking over the land by war. Or the greed of mankind, where people will do anything for gold, or anything that they want, and it might make you a hard person, who only sees the worst in humanity, but there is good in this world, people who have compassion for the less fortunate or those who try their hardest to provide for their family, even if it kills them from exhaustion. I said, looking at Jane, who was now leaning into Julius, who had both of his arms around her. We will be here for a very, very long time, if not forever, and something I have learned through all the time I have lived, is that living with hatred in your heart will never let you truly experience the joy we were given through the gift that is our immortal lives. There are things I could have done to help humanity, things I could have made, that I knew would help the world, from medicine, to better weapons for people to defend themselves, or I could have become a king chosen by God, and ruled a kingdom, but I knew that the greed of humans will never change no matter what I did. The medicines I made would have been taken by the greedy and traded to far lands, to be sold for mountains of gold. The weapons I made, would be taken and reproduced by others, to be used for wars, by self-proclaimed kings, and if I became a king, those surrounding me would become jealous of what I created and would wage wars for it, all of it causing pointless death to the undeserving. And of course I could stop them from doing it, but how many times will I have to do so? Once, twice, over and over again. I will get rid of them, but there will always be someone else to take their spot. So I decided long ago, that trying to change the world would be a constantly losing battle. So I'm not going to try and change it, and I'm just going to let time run its course, and to just enjoy the gift I was given. How do you do it? Jane asked, from within Julius's arms. I looked at her in confusion. Do what? I asked her. You have seen the dark side of humans, the worst they can become, but how do you not hate humans? She asked. I sat for a moment as I thought about her words. After a moment, a small smile crept onto my face. I don't hate them, because I know what they are doing is human nature. Emotion is a natural feeling in all of us. There are a lot of things in us that we can't control, because it's human nature. All the bad and good emotional characteristics in us, we take on through life, and let's be honest, in this point in time, there is a lot of bad happening, making a lot of bad people. It's the circumstances of our lives, and the world around us, that make us who we are, and who we become. If you were born poor, you could be greedy, selfish, or jealous. If you are born rich, you could be arrogant, lazy, cruel, and ignorant. I said with a shrug of my shoulders. But that doesn't mean all those people born in those circumstances take on those characteristics. I said, raising a hand, and pointing at Julius. Take Julius for example. He was born into a rich family, his father was a successful merchant, he had everything he could want growing up, but his father instilled in him good characteristics like empathy, generosity, humility, and integrity, when he could have been cruel, ignorant, and greedy. Then pointing at myself and twisting some words, I said. And myself, I came into this world with no family, and lived in a nomadic tribe that hunted for food, and where wealth wasn't even an idea in anyone's head. With my abilities I could have taken over the tribe, for my own benefit, just because I wanted to, or because I could, but I didn't, because those people put in me a good set of standards that I stand by and still use today: honesty, humility, and love. But not everyone has good people to guide them in the right direction, some none at all to guide them, and there are some, who no matter what you do, or the circumstances they were born into, they can still take on good or bad traits. It's life, personal choices, the people and the family, who guide us, and the circumstances that we are born into, all of that is what will carve out who we will become, because it is human nature to take on the characteristics of those around us. Julius looked at me with furrowed brows, and asked. Then why do you hate the Romanians? I let out a sigh. That is for self-redemption. I tried to help them, but my actions caused the death of a lot of innocent people. Even though I saved some, I indirectly killed a lot more. And I'm hoping that after taking down the Romanian coven, that it will allow me to wash some of the blood off my hands, I said, unconsciously rubbing my hands together. After a moment of silence I spoke again. I guess what I'm trying to say with all of this is, there is no point in hating people for human nature. Like with you, Jane, it's human nature for people to be afraid of things they don't understand, and they didn't understand you and your family. I'm not saying it's right, what they did, but just keep that in mind when you think about it, or when you also see the bad part of humanity. Jane nodded her head. And I mean what I said, Adam. I am sorry for what I said. Jane said. I smiled at her. I am also sorry for what I did, so now that that is out of the way, and behind us, I think it's time to bring up the Volturi. I said, clapping my hands together, and in a happier voice in an attempt to clear the sad air. Super rushed chapter. But what I'm trying to get across here is that, the MC is letting history unfold, without his direct interference, because he fears that his interference could cause ripples in time that could cause the indirect death of many more if he did get involved. Kill a tyrant king to stop a war that could have killed a few thousand, but indirectly kill 10,000 because of a civil war for the throne. There will be times the MC will get involved, but for the most part, he is just going to let everything play out. Chapter 36, High Seas and a Plan. 5 months later. Year 701. Age 4,701. The rock of my ship swayed me side to side, or I should say threw me side to side. From the start of our journey, it had been nothing but bad weather, the whole time. And on a ship, bad weather means bad seas, and when there are bad seas, that means a terrible trip. I was currently on the main deck of one of my trading vessels, that I commandeered for my own use. It was one of my middleweight ships, that traded spices and fabrics, from the Far East to Europe. I was standing by the steering wheel, where the captain stood, and navigated the large waves as they bashed into the ship's hull, like large hammers. Thankfully the rain had finally stopped, for the moment. After a few minutes of the salty sea air, I went back under into my small cabin, inside the blackened room were Jane and Julius. Stepping into the small room only lit by a small candle, I could see them reading books, at a small table and bench that was nailed down to keep the user or the table and bench from flying across the cabin, along one side. Taking off my coat which was now soaked with seawater, I hung it on a small peg that was placed by the door, for this very use. Julius looked up from his crudely made book and asked, "What did the captain say?" Sitting down next to him I said, "We should be there tomorrow by midday." All of us couldn't wait to finally be back on dry land, where we weren't constantly being thrown around by the ocean, and the smells of a ship didn't help with our senses. A bad smell for regular humans is worse for us. And the wooden cages of small animals we had prepared for the journey stank as well. Before the voyage, we had prepared a few wooden cages for rabbits, me and Julius had caught, so when on the voyage, we wouldn't run the risk of them getting thirsty before we reached land, and needed to find something else to fill the thirst. Just then the ship rocked backwards then forward. The cages that held the rabbits slid along the floor, with their inhabitants inside. After a few seconds, the ship went back to its natural heavy sway. Grabbing one of the scrolls from one of my bags, I read through its contents. Once I read through the scroll and about a medical theory, where it was believed that removing the pinky toe could cure kidney stones, my mind went over how I obtained this scroll and most of the others I owned. I took them from the Library of Alexandria before Julius Caesar accidentally burned it to the ground. In the chaos, I may or may not have led a wagon train of empty wagons to the library's main door. And while everyone was running away from the approaching threat that was Julius Caesar and his fleet of ships, I at full speed emptied a large chunk of the library, before the fire from the docks spread to the library. Once I filled the train, with as much as I could, I headed back to Rome and put them in my villa, but over 90,000 scrolls take up more space than you might think, so I ended up placing them in my banks for safer storage, and once I moved to England I had them carefully moved to the main bank, where I would go every few weeks to exchange the scrolls. The scrolls were made up of different types of materials, from papyrus, leather, parchment, and rudimentary types of paper, which could be hard to keep in good condition. The good thing about my banks, where I store the scrolls, is that deep underground is the perfect place to preserve objects. It's not too hot or cold, and away from the elements. Once again the ship rocked forward then backward hard, sending the cages sliding across the ground again. But this time when one of the 3 cages passed I swear I heard one of the rabbits screaming. Or maybe that was just my imagination, I have never been good at being cooped up in small places. Once the ship settled, I decided to get some sleep, to hopefully make this hellish trip go faster. Standing up, I walked to one of the hammocks and got comfortable. As I swayed with the waves of the ship, I went over the plans that me, Julius, and Jane came up with. The most important this, is to find a way for Julius and Jane to be able to combat Chelsea's mind manipulation, because I knew for a fact, that as soon as Arrow found out or saw what their abilities were, he would go to great lengths to get them on his side. Julius alone might be one of the strongest vampires to ever live. Which made me wonder what happened to him in the movie. Someone with his alignment and belief to not murder innocent people for their blood would have made him perfect to be with the Cullen family, so what happened to him? This is a quandary I have thought about many times, and over again I came to the same conclusion, and that is that Julius probably ended his own life, rather than kill humans. And that conclusion stemmed from Julius's biggest fear. To become a monster. At first, Julius thought he had become a monster. The call to human blood he felt confirmed it to him. But when I showed him he could survive on animal blood, it showed that to be otherwise. Kicking my brain back on track. We weren't sure how we might be able to shield their minds from the mental abilities that Chelsea possessed, other than a vampire who might possess a shield ability. I thought about giving them my blood, but I realized that it's the chip in my grey matter that protects my mind from mental abilities and my blood wouldn't have the same effect. So the plan we came up with was to find an old friend of mine, an Egyptian named Amon, who I'm sure at the moment is very angry at a group of vampires who killed his whole coven in front of him. We weren't sure if he would even have anything or know something that could help us. But he was the only vampire that I really knew besides the Volturi, Romanians, or Julius and Jane. Of course, I knew other covens existed across Europe and Asia, but I never had any contact with them. I was always happy to let them do their own thing as long as they left me alone to do mine. And I'm currently hoping that Amon might still be angry at the Volturi for what happened, that he would be willing to help. But I also wasn't optimistic either. From what I remember, the mental scars of seeing his coven torn to bits, made Amon incredibly afraid of angering the Volturi, and sending him and the surviving members of his coven into hiding, not even shadows of their previous selves. I was also hoping that they would still even remember me. It had been a few thousand years since I last came into contact with them, so the probability that they still remembered me was slim, but hey, we can hope, right? Slowly, with the gentle sway of the ship and the hammock, my eyelids slowly drooped, until completely closed and I was asleep. Chapter 37, Alexandria and a Heart Attack. It took another week before we finally made it to Egypt. Thankfully, the last few days, the weather had settled down, and made the trip a little more bearable. The ship docked in Alexandria. As the ship was tied to the docks, I looked around at the busy dock area, where thousands of people could be seen wandering around the docks. At the moment, Julius and Jane stood beside me, both covered in long, lightly colored cloaks that covered them from head to toe, only leaving their faces exposed, but covered by a shadow that was made by the hood of their cloaks. While I, on the other hand, I wore a dark green tunic that went to right above my knees, with a fine fabric as my belt that went around my waist, and dark breeches, with knee-high deerskin boots, what I normally wore every day. The only thing different is the fact that I had my hair tied up, and hidden under a piece of fabric that I wore over my head, to keep my hair out of sight, as well to help keep the sun out of my eyes. Normally I would wear my sunglasses, but I was trying to blend in with the crowd, not stick out more than I already will. In England or other European areas, people might think my hair is just really blonde, to the point it looks white or silver. It's been known to happen, but here the sight of white hair could become a problem. I'm just thankful I no longer need to hide under long clothes to hide my pale skin. With the occupation of Rome and Egypt, it became common to see pale people here. Of course I still got stared at for my overly pale skin and height, but a lot less than I would have gotten a few thousand years ago. Stepping off the ship, we merged into the large crowd of people, and headed to my bank, which was placed in the middle of the city. Rome had been forced out of Egypt a little over 600 years ago, but thankfully I got word of the trouble that was taking place, and sent word to the Alexandria bank head to get in touch with the leaders of the forces that were kicking the Romans out, and to make a deal with them, offer them 20,000 gold, for leaving the bank alone. Of course we also told them what would happen if they didn't. It was the usual: we can destroy your country with the pure amount of money we have, by paying whole countries to go to war with you at the same time, to the point you are surrounded on all sides and have nowhere to go, or that we can hire assassin groups to go after you every day until one of them is finally successful, or you back off and leave the bank alone. Or that we can sink your entire country by pulling the bank out of your country while Roman soldiers still hold a majority of Egypt's cities, by pulling back all loans in full all at once, with a 10% interest. Taking a large chunk of your country's wealth with us. And of course they would say something along the lines of, we will take your banks first before the rest of the cities, in the hope of securing wealth for themselves and the country. And we would say, you could do that if we had gold in our bank, but most of the gold is moved between the other banks. When there is conflict in a country where a bank is, the gold is transferred to one of the other banks, where it is safe, making it a moot point. But after we showed the stick, we showed the carrot, where with our far reach, we can help with trade agreements, we can help with your economy, and us just being in your country is a boon, that will draw traders, but as soon as we are gone from your lands, no country will want to anger our bank, and risk us taking away the boons we give them. So they won't trade with them, and avoid any contact with the country that angered the Gringotts bank. I'm really happy Julius implemented that rule recently. Wars had been a worry to me for a long time, but now any time a country is under attack, or a state of conflict, most of the money in the banks is transferred to other banks. I had forgotten how much war and conflict there was in this period in time. I was used to the 21st century, where war didn't involve conquering, and just involved blowing stuff up from a distance. Then once everything was destroyed, we left. But now, in the time of kings, war was the only option for most monarchs, to expand and grow, to support their subjects as well as to add to the ability to bring in income. As we neared the bank, I looked at the building that was built on top of a large hill that rose above the city. The building was built in a mix of Greek and Roman, made out of white limestone for the walls. The large pillars that went around the building were made from marble, like what you would see in Greece. But it also had its Roman flair, with statues on the roof, at all four corners, as well as intricate art built or carved into the limestone and marble. Walking up the 12 steps and past the massive pillars, I came to the main door. The main door was made out of 6-inch of steel that could be locked from the inside. And with a foot of limestone as the walls, it would be extremely hard to get in, if not impossible to get in with the door closed. But what caught my eyes was what was above the door. In gold the word Gringotts was displayed. And I couldn't help but chuckle at the historians explaining all of this, in later years. During the day the large metal doors were left open, with 8 guards standing outside the door. The guards all wore polished Roman-style armor with helmets and purple capes and tunics under their armor. The purple was my idea for the bank's color, which I chose to be royal purple. From the look of them, the guards were ex-Roman legionaries, who found our pay better than their military pay. The guards' eyes glanced at me for only a moment but slid off me a second later, when they didn't see anything dangerous about me. They did linger on Julius and Jane, but only for a moment before looking for other threats. Stepping inside the massive building of opulence and wealth that was my bank's, the floor was polished marble with intricate art on the walls and ceiling. Candles lit up the inside, from where they were placed on the walls and hanging from the ceiling above on large metal chandeliers, all of which had gold inlays added to them. Inside the bank, there were more guards inside the main area, all standing to attention, off to the side, where they would be out of sight unless you looked right at them. The massive open room was cut in half, by the reception areas, which is where you go and talk to a person who will help you. Behind them, is the office area, where you could see people hard at work with paperwork and other duties. Stepping up to one of the areas, I handed the middle-aged woman a small thin piece of gold that was shaped like a credit card. The woman looked at it in confusion, but she did take it from me, and glanced at what was on the gold card. As soon as she saw it, her face went pale, and she looked up at me in shock. Her reaction brought a small smile to my face. In a rush, the lady pulled a deep red cord that hung beside her. The cord went to the ceiling, and along the top, to the back wall where it ran along the wall to where I could see a large desk with a man sitting behind it. The man looked at the bell that was ringing non-stop on the wall by his desk, then over at where the lady pulling it was. All the while the lady continued to pull the cord while giving me a wide smile and said, "Just one moment, sir, the head man will be right with you." All the while, continually yanking the cord. The small bell echoed through the building, drawing people's attention to the spectacle. The man that was sitting behind the desk must have figured out something was going on, so he scurried over, as fast as his legs could carry him. As he scurried between the desks and the people working, I watched his approach. The man was no more than 4'7" with a bald head and a massive mustache, and gold rings on all of his fingers, and the nicest clothes money could buy. The money and clothes weren't a surprise to me. My bank heads must circulate with kings and the rich, and you must look and act like them for them to even listen to a word you say. Of course they were watched carefully to make sure they don't get greedy or make any bad decisions that could hurt the bank, in any way. Those who did, tended to go missing without a word, then to be replaced the next day. Turning to look over at Julius and Jane, I gave them a quick wink, then turned back just as the short man arrived. The look of awe on Jane's face almost made me burst out laughing. When I saw her, unlike Julius who has seen my banks many times before, Jane was open-mouthed, in awe, and shock, from the amount of wealth that was clear for all to see. As the man arrived, a warm smile spread across his face as he stepped onto a small stool so he could look over the marble divider tellers' desks. Then he looked at the lady who finally stopped pulling the cord that rang the small bell. "Yes, Heba," the man said to the lady. The teller handed over the gold card with a shaking hand. Taking the card from the lady, the short man looked at what was carved delicately into it. And nothing happened, or well, something did happen. The man froze, completely, and for around 30 seconds he stared at the card and the seal punched into the middle of the card. The seal was something only the heads of the bank knew about. Each of the head bankers had had one seal press for messages that they sent, and as a symbol of their position in the bank. But what was different about my seal was the crown over the seal, signifying me as the head of Gringotts. As I was starting to worry about the man kept out a yell, grabbed the right side of his chest then fell backwards, off his small stool and onto the hard marble floor. Leaning over the desk, I could see the small man holding onto his chest, all the while, still staring at the card in his hand. Chapter 38, Long Time No See. It turned out that the man didn't have a heart attack like I had originally thought, but instead a panic attack. Not because he had anything to hide or did anything wrong. I would know if he did. But out of panic of meeting me, because over the years I had become such a mystical person to the bank heads. Never before had any of the living bank heads besides the one in England, seen me before. Making me, someone that the bank heads could only imagine in their heads. They didn't know I was immortal or anything, but to the bank heads the owner was a shadow that none had seen before. After the man woke up, and was no longer hyperventilating, he was given some water, so he could calm down. After a few more minutes the man was finally able to talk, and move. He guided me, Julius and Jane back to his desk, where he asked me to sit at the desk where he would have sat. Waving him off I said. "That is your chair, not mine," I said, waving his request off, and taking a seat in one of the nice wooden chairs that sat in front of his desk. Once the man sat down, so did Julius and Jane. Once we were all seated I began talking. Where are my manners?" I said as I stretched an arm over the desk. As he shook my hand I said. "My name is Adam Gray." Yes, my name is Thoth Bishay," he said as my large hand practically swallowed his small hand whole. "It is nice to meet you, Thoth. I have heard good things about you," I said, as we separated hands. Thoth smiled at my words, and said. "I try my best, sir." I chuckled at his words. "I am sure you are wondering why I am here without warning," I said, with a small smirk. Thoth nods his head. "I will not lie, it is a shock for you to come here, but I am always happy and ready for your arrival," he said in a chipper voice. I smiled at the man. His happy attitude seemed to radiate off him, and fill the large room. "That is kind of you to say, Thoth," I said with another chuckle. "The reason I came was because I'm looking for someone," I said, leaning back in my chair. Thoth sat forward in his chair, and looked me in the eyes, and said. "Of course, sir, all I will need is a name, then a family name," he said, pulling a piece of parchment from his desk, then grabbed something to write with, ready for my words. "His name is Amon. I don't know his last name, but whoever has that name with the most gold in their vault is them," I said. Thoth wrote down the name, then said. "I will be right back with the information for you, sir," he said, getting out of his chair then scurrying away. Jane looked over at me and in a whisper said. "This place is yours." I looked over at her and smirked. "It is, why, didn't think I was a man of good standing in the world." Jane rolled her eyes at my words. "No, I didn't, of course I knew you had valuable things in the underground area of the house, but this," she said, looking around. Jane has only recently become accustomed to being around people again without the urge to drink them dry. We brought her to Londinium a few times to test her being around people, but we never brought her to the bank, because there was no need. And the first time she heard of the banks was on the ship, where I explained to her how I owned a few banks that were spread out among other countries. I may have not told her the fact of how big my banks are, and how much money my banks deal with. To be honest, my banks sometimes surprise me. Normally I would only deal with the underground part of the bank, making sure that the vaults were made properly, and built in the right spots, while having someone from one of my banks deal with the top half. And with no budget, some of my banks could get very godly. Julius chuckled at Jane's words. "If you knew how much money he really has, you might die of shock." Before Jane could ask another question, Thoth came back to the desk and sat down. In his hands was a piece of parchment. Setting it down on the table he said. "We have found what you were looking for. His name is Amon, but has no last name on record. He currently has a little over 100,000 gold in his vault as well as a large number of rare gems and diamonds," Thoth said, turning the paper around so we could see. "His last withdrawal was 4 days ago, where he took out 200 gold. Thoth added. I grabbed the paper off of his desk and went over the information on it. And like Thoth had said, it had the current state of Amon's vault as well as his last 5 transactions. But at the bottom of the sheet was written the address, or more like directions, and a description of the home. The home was apparently a compound in between 2 other compound buildings with large walls all around. Looking up at Thoth, I gave him a smile and said. "This is just what I was looking for." Thoth smiled at me, and said. "I am glad I could help, sir." Standing up, from my chair I say. "That will be all I will need, if I need anything else I will come back. With handshakes and a goodbye we were back out the door. The home was in a busy area close to a market, and was only a 30-minute walk from the bank. As we walked through the crowds of people, I thought back to when I used to set up my own stands in places like this, and spend hours every day selling pelts and small knickknacks that I would make or find on my travels. A part of me missed it, the adventure and the people I used to meet and help on those travels. Maybe one day I would start doing so again. After 20 more minutes of walking and toiling a few dozen pickpockets we finally found the place. Tucked in between two other buildings was a 7-foot wall with large wooden doors. Stopping in the street in front of the doors, I looked at Julius and Jane. The odds are that they won't want to talk to us, so just let me handle this, I say looking at both of them. They both gave me nods, so stepping up to the door, I knocked twice on the door. And nothing. We waited for a few minutes before I banged again, this time harder. But once again, nobody opened. Maybe they aren't here, Julius said, from behind me. Oh, they are here, I said looking up at the large door. I'm gonna knock again to be nice, but if they don't answer I'm going over the wall, I said, not looking back at Julius and Jane. This time when I knocked, I put much more power into it. Now when my knuckles hit the door they were loud bangs, making the large doors rattled on their hinges. Not even a second later the doors swung open, and there he stood, with dark curly hair and a goatee, was Amon. Are you insane? He bellowed. Don't you people know to leave us alone? We have warned you time and time again, and yet you continue to bother us. He continued, but before he could continue. Long time no see, I said, in a chipper voice, cutting off his next rant. Amon froze as he looked at me, his mouth hanging open, as he looked at me. You, he yelled again. I nodded my head. Yeah, how am I alive? I said waving a hand in the air. What how? He stammered. Look, we need to talk, I said to him. So can we come in or are you going to continue yelling at us? Now Amon just stares at me, breaking away from looking at me. He turned to look at Jane and Julius, who were behind me. His eyes lingered on them for a moment, as he saw the color of their eyes. And then he did something that surprised me. In a blur of motion, Amon slammed the large doors in our faces. I was confused, and a little bewildered. Turning around I said to Julius and Jane. That went better than expected, I said with a smile. Both Julius and Jane looked at each other then back at me. In what way exactly was this better than you were expecting? Julius said in a dry tone. Well, for one, this is the Amon we are looking for, and second, he didn't try to kill us. Chapter 39, Amon. Turning back to the door, I bang again. Leave, I heard Amon yell from the other side of the door. Amon, we need to talk, can you please let us in? No, you are not welcome here, leave us be. I let out a sigh. Amon, if you don't let us in, I'm going to break down this door, so just let us in, all I want is to talk, I said close to the door. I knew I didn't need to yell through the thick doors for him to hear me. Listening for his response, I waited, but got nothing in response. So taking a few steps back, I prepared to kick in the door. It wasn't something I wanted to do, but I needed to talk to Amon. I was a little worried that people would see me kick in the door, but at the moment I didn't really care. Amon had the chance to let me in, but instead he would rather hide in his home. So when people see me kick in these massive doors, they were going to be very shocked, and then suspicious that a man was able to do that, because the force I was about to use could be massive, probably exploding the door into splinters. Not the best idea I have ever had, but I didn't come here to waste time. But hey, I don't live here so I won't need to deal with the consequences of people seeing me do this, Amon will. So taking a few steps back, I prepared for the kick. And right when I started the motions for the kick, one of the doors opened. Stopping dead in my tracks, I look up at the door. But it wasn't Amon, this time it was Kabi, Amon's mate. Standing just inside the door, covered by the doorway so she was in shadow, Kabi spoke. Please come in, she said, taking a step to the side. Straightening back up, I looked at Jane and Julius, and shrugged my shoulders. Turning back I looked at Kabi. She was wearing white robes with intricate patterns, as well as a number of sparkling jewels on her. Kabi stepped to the side, allowing me to step in. Stepping in I looked around the small courtyard. The courtyard was small, with a few decorative pots scattered about, as well as a few plants, what made this courtyard different from others, was the fact that the top was heavily shaded with a woven top that only allowing enough light in so the plants can survive, and to be comfortable. Once I stepped in, Jane and Julius followed close behind. Kabi closed the massive doors with ease, then lowered a thick piece of wood to bar the door. Turning to us, Kabi said, "Please forgive Amon, he hasn't been the same since, well I'm sure you know," she said in a somber tone. "I can imagine," I said, nodding my head. "But we need to talk to him," I continued. "He might have some information that can help us." Kabi looked at me for a moment before she finally nodded her head. "Very well, follow me," she said, gesturing for us to follow her. Kabi led us into the large house, and just like the courtyard the inside was shaded, candles being the only source of light. We didn't need light to see, but when vampires see in the dark all that can be seen is black and white, not color. That's why most vampires don't just live in the dark, unless they are dull grunge idiots that are all dark and gloomy. Kabi led us to the back of the house and up some stairs, to the second floor. Most of it was open with one half a sitting area with countless pillows on the ground, and the other half, shelves of scrolls and other things that might fill someone's time. Sitting in a small pile of pillows with a scroll was Amon. "Kabi," I thought I said to just ignore them. Amon said, looking away from his scroll. "And I heard you, but what are we going to do, just waste away in these walls forever?" Kabi said in anger. It was clear to see that this was a conversation they have had countless times before, and one that Amon apparently refuses to deal with. "Yes Kabi, that is the plan," he said, his voice becoming louder. And for a moment the room was silent, then turning to me Amon said, "And you, how are you still alive? You aren't one of us, you should have been dead for 1,000 years." "Well yes I should be dead, but I'm not, nor will I ever be dead." "Then what are you?" I just shrugged my shoulders, "Just a guy," I said. Amon gave me a raised eyebrow then opened his mouth to speak, but before he could I cut him off. The whole "what are you, how are you alive" questions were really starting to get old. "Look, all I need is some help or advice, then we will be out of here so you can get back to your seclusion." Amon gave me a raised eyebrow. "Seclusion, you think this is seclusion? This is us hiding," he snapped. I couldn't help but laugh at his words. "You call this hiding? I found you in a matter of hours, this isn't hiding. And besides who would you be hiding from? The Volturi could find you anywhere they wanted, I hear their tracker is quite skilled," I said with a slight chuckle to my voice. "It is seclusion." Kabi cut in. Turning to her I asked, "Why would you go into seclusion? Yes you lost to the Volturi but you are still alive and the Volter knows it, if they wanted you dead you would be, start over again, make a new coven but don't act like gods the next time that you do so," I said. "If there is one thing I know about the Volturi, it is that they might be a big group of asshats, but they do stick to their rules, for the most part, so as long as you follow their rules you should be fine," I said. Amon opened his mouth to speak, but was cut off again but by Kabi. "We are here because of the price we paid to survive." Gesturing to Amon, Kabi continued. "One of Amon's abilities is a strong sense of survival, and the first time we came into contact with the Volturi in a threatening manner, Amon instantly knew, the only way was to either run, or to beg the Volturi to spare our coven, but things didn't go as planned, they manipulated his mind, making him betray our coven, against his will," Kabi said, her voice somber. I went still for a moment. That was something I didn't know about. In the movies, very little was said about Amon, other than the fact the Volturi destroyed his coven and Kabi and Amon were the only survivors. Neither Amon or Kabi said anything. But after a few moments Amon spoke. "We did not have a choice, other than death. If we ran they would find us, if we fought they would kill us, no matter what they would have killed us, so I made a choice, and that choice was to come to the Volturi on my knees, but as soon as I was there, they manipulate my mind, bending me to their will, and as soon as my coven was gone, they set me free, to live with the fact that I was too weak to protect my coven, and that I am the one that told them where our home was," Amon said, his hands clenched. It actually explains a lot about Amon, why he never really tried to start a new coven, and why he tried to avoid everyone. He feels guilty for what he did, he betrayed those who trusted him to lead them, even though he couldn't help it, so racked with guilt, Amon put himself in seclusion, and away from the vampire world. Talk about a mindfuck, one day you are a god among mortals, and the next you are nothing but trash in the eyes of others. It made me feel a little bad for the guy, I thought. "That is why I came here," I said gesturing to Jane and Julius. I myself am protected from the mind manipulation that the Volturi use, but they are not, I said pointing at Jane and Julius again. But it seems you can't help us, I said with a shrug. Turning to leave, I come to a stop when Amon speaks. Why do you need something to protect them? Keep them far away from the Volturi, or you will just end up losing them. Amon spat. Turning around I said. For two reasons, one is her. I said pointing at Jane, second is to help the Volturi finally put an end to the Romanian coven. Chapter 40, Julius and his smarts. Julius POV. I would like to say our journey is going well, and I would also like to say that it wasn't. Our goal in coming to Egypt and to talk to this Amon, who apparently was one of the oldest vampires still alive, was to find a way for me and Jane to be mentally shielded from the Volturi member that can manipulate others' minds. But from what I know, is that it's impossible. I have delved into the scrolls Adam has in the bank and at our home for any kind of information or mention of something that could work for us, but I couldn't find anything. He even let me go through the hundreds of scrolls, or journals, that Adam himself had written about his journey through the years he wandered the earth. In one of his earlier journals, Adam wrote about his first meeting with the Volturi, and how they tried to manipulate him, but he didn't go into great detail about it, or any possibility as to why he is different, and it doesn't work on him, just that it didn't, and his mind is shielded from mental abilities. But that's nothing new about him. Over the years I have learned Adam tends to skip anything that might have to do with himself. For starters, the first scroll Adam wrote, he talked about his first memories of this world, that he woke in the woods, nude, and fully grown, but without any memories. He practically summarized the whole thing, and then skipped it, as if he knew more than he was writing, or he actually did know anything, but you would expect someone to try and find out why they woke up in the woods, with no memories about themselves. I never asked him about it. I knew if I did he would avoid the question entirely. Adam is a master at wordplay and could misdirect your attention until you forgot or you were so jumbled up in the head, that you couldn't bother to ask about the questions anymore. I guess that's a skill you can get when you were a merchant for over 1,000 years. At the moment we were in Alexandria, where this Amon is, meeting him for the first time, I would have never expected someone like him to be as old as he is, but I also wouldn't have guessed Adam was almost 5,000 years old. Amon was clearly a man with many issues stuffed away in his head. He was rash, prideful and self-centered, oh and I almost forgot untrusting. The man wanted nothing to do with us at the mere sight of Adam, and now wanted us to leave, at the mere mention of the Volturi. At the moment Amon and Adam were in a back and forth argument as to why Amon should help us. Blocking out the annoying bickering, I started to think. This Chelsea, who can make or break emotional ties, is a serious threat. Like Adam said, me and Jane are strong. If we were to be turned against him, it could be bad. Adam is strong, but there is only so much he is able to handle. When fighting me he is already hard-pressed. If he fought me, Jane and the rest of the Volturi, he wouldn't stand a chance. My mind swirled with thoughts of how we could combat Chelsea's powers. Her powers are mental, and affect the mind. She can make or break the emotional ties you have with someone, so how do we shield our minds and keep her from going into our minds? My thoughts came to a dead stop. Shield me, I might be able to block her. Without thinking twice, or bothering to tell anyone, I close my eyes. When I use my ability in new ways, it needs good mental focus, and good control over the force I use. Mental focus helps me not lose control when using the ability, and control helps me not accidentally crush something when I try to pick something up, like a cup or a scroll. But what if I condensed the force I normally use, into a bubble around me and Jane? So with that thought I visualize a round sphere in front of me, around the size of my fist. And push it all together. The power in me seemed to slowly seep out of me. Instead of the steady stream of leaving energy that I normally felt when using my power, the power needed to do basic things with my abilities made me need to feed daily instead of the every few days that Jane had before a need to feed. But unwilling to give up, I continued to pour more into the small bubble I was visualizing. And finally after a few minutes the leaving energy stopped. No matter how hard I tried to continue pushing power into it, none would enter. Slowly I opened my eyes. And noticed that while I was focused, the room had fallen silent. Adam POV. Amon has turned into the biggest prick I have ever met. Our verbal sparring had been going back and forth for a few minutes now, me trying to convince Amon to help us, and him, being a dick, and too prideful and scared to help us. Then out of nowhere he stopped talking and looked past me. Confused, I turned to look, and my jaw dropped. Julius stood dead still with his eyes shut, next to Jane, which isn't that strange or a reason for Amon to stop talking. What was strange and a reason for us to shut up was what was floating in front of Julius. A small clear ball was floating in front of him, at chest level. The only reason I could see it was because of the candle light gleaming off of the orb. A moment later Julius finally opened his eyes. Julius, what is that?" I asked him. Julius looked down at the floating orb, and slowly brought one of his hands up, and grabbed the orb. "I'm not really sure, but I think it might be the answer to what we have been looking for," he said, not looking up from the orb. Chapter 41, Testing Newfound Skill. Taking a step forward, I slowly bring my hand up and poke it. Julius looks up at me. "What are you doing?" I look up at Julius. "I'm touching it." Why are you touching it?" I wanted to see if it would pop or something. Julius looks back down at the orb. "Where my finger was in the orb." "What did you do?" I asked him. "I just condensed my power into a ball," Julius said. While my finger was still in the orb, I could feel a weird tingling feeling on the tip of my finger, the same feeling you would get when you touched those electric ball lamps. I think they were called a plasma ball lamp, where when you touched it with your fingers, you would feel slight electric shocks, but this feeling was lighter, and barely noticeable. Looking back up at Julius, I ask, "Do you think this will work?" Julius just shrugged his shoulders. "I don't know, I guess that if I condensed my power into a small orb it might be enough to keep them from entering our minds." "What is the meaning of this?" Amon said from over my shoulder. Without turning, I raise a finger and say, "One moment." I heard the scoff, but decided to ignore the prick for the moment. "Let's test it now." "Now?" Julius asked, confused. Nodding my head. "Better now than later." Julius looked over my shoulder. "What about them?" I chuckled at his words. "It won't matter, when we go to see the Volturi, your powers will be seen, so there's no point in hiding it. And if I had to guess, they are going to test us and force you to show any powers you might have." Julius nodded his head. "How do you want to test it?" Julius asked. "Move the orb so it can surround your head, but make it a bit bigger so it can surround your head whole." I say, taking a step back. I watch as the orb slowly raised up then towards Julius's head, all the while it slowly expands until it is a little larger than Julius's head. It was interesting to see the orb move and expand. It was almost completely invisible, but the candle flame's flickering rays shined off the orb, like a clear soap bubble that had a mind of its own. The orb moved up and slowly, it enveloped his head. I couldn't stop the chuckle that escaped my lips, as I saw Julius now. It looked like he was wearing a small space helmet. Before Julius could ask what was so funny, Amon broke into the conversation again. "What is that?" he asked, stepping next to me, to see the orb surrounding Julius's head. "It's his ability," I say, looking over and down at Amon. "What, making bubbles?" I shook my head. "No, it's something called telekinesis." Amon looked at me. "And what exactly is this telekinesis?" he asked, stumbling over the unfamiliar word. "It's telekinesis, and what it is a psychic ability. It's the ability to move or manipulate objects using the power of the mind, without any physical contact. In other words, it is the ability to control and influence the physical world through the sheer force of one's thoughts. He can exert his mental energy to manipulate objects, such as making them levitate, move, or even break. But what he's doing now is he has condensed his telekinesis down and into an orb that we can place around their heads to make small mental shields," I said, looking down at him again. Amon's eyes were wide with shock as he stared at the glimmering ball around Julius's head. "And it works?" he asked, now seeming excited. "That's what we were about to figure out before you interfered," I said, looking back up at Julius. "How does it feel around your head?" Julius let out a small chuckle. "It tingles," he said, as he let out a small laugh. "Well, I guess that's good. How is your control over it?" "Steady, I barely need to concentrate on it. It's like I'm just holding the shape of it, keeping the telekinesis energy inside of it." I nod my head, and scratch my chin. "So let's test this," I say, looking at Jane. "Let's see if he can feel anything." Jane turned to look at Julius with a devilish smile on her face. The small hint of terror on Julius' face was very amusing to see. More than once had Julius been the target to Jane's mental fire ability, and knew well how much it hurt. Looking Julius in the eyes, Jane said one simple word: pain. And, nothing happened. Julius just stood there looking confused and relieved. Looking at me, he said, I guess it works. Try a few more times. I want to see if it continues to work or if it wears down after multiple mental attacks. And so turning to face each other again, Jane said pain. And again nothing happened. Keep going at least 10 times, if nothing happens then we should be good. What is her ability? Amon asked, pointing a finger at Jane. Jane possesses a unique power we call pain illusion. Her power allows her to create the illusion of intense physical pain in the minds of her targets, even though no actual physical harm is done. She can incapacitate and immobilize her opponents with excruciating agony. It supposedly feels like you are being burned alive, or that's what I have been told, I said, as I continued to watch Jane and Julius test the new mind shield. Incredible, both of them are incredible. Amon said as he continued to watch them as well. You do know that Era will want them, don't you? He said, not looking at me. I do, that's why we came here. We wanted to know if you might have a way to block the Volturi from their minds, but if you two were manipulated then I'm guessing you don't. Amon shook his head. No, I don't, although I wish I did. I could have possibly saved my coven if I did. He said in a somber tone. No, you couldn't have. Amon looked over at me with a confused expression. What do you mean? You were an example, for the rest of the covens that exist, no matter what you were doomed. The reason it was you, was because you weren't as big as the Romanian coven, who is a real threat to the Volturi's rule. You were the second biggest, with no vampires with combative abilities. They knew they could take you down, getting rid of a possible threat, while making you an example. Amon stared at me for a moment, before he bowed his head. I guessed as much. The only reason they let me live was because of my ties to the other covens I had been close to. They guessed as long as I was alive the other covens wouldn't band together and fight them. Before they took on the Romanian coven, the last thing they wanted was to fight 2 wars at once, and as it turned out they were correct. All the other covens cared about was my influence here in Egypt, allowing them to make money in trade deals and insider information that I have here. They didn't care if my coven was gone, just that I lived. Just then I heard a small squeal. Turning my head I saw Julius staggering backwards. How many was that? I asked. That was 7, Jane said, as she helped Julius to stabilize himself, and not fall over, as the pain washed over him. So the shield wears down after a few mental attacks. I said, as Julius finally became stable on his feet. Yes, but I can feel the attacks on it. After every attack a small amount of the energy that's contained in the orb leaves, but I'm sure if I replenish the energy after every attack we should be okay. He said, giving me a thumbs up. The thumbs up was something I showed him after doing it by accident when he asked to read some of my scrolls. At first he was confused by it, because all he knew it to mean was when gladiators wanted mercy. After explaining how I used it, I have begun to see him using it more and more over time. That's good, it means no matter what you will be shielded from any mental attacks, but first we need to figure something out about the size. We don't want them to be able to see that you have that around your head, but I'm sure after some training you will figure something out. I said. Turning to Amon, I saw that Kabu was now standing next to him. I guess it's time for us to leave, and let you get back to your solitude. I say, putting out a hand to shake. Amon slowly grabbed my hand. Sorry for my reaction, but can you blame me? I thought you were just a regular human man all those years ago who was long dead, then out of nowhere over 1,000 years later you knock on my door. He said with a small smile. I can now see how that might spook you. Yes, sorry about that. I used to travel a lot, but over the last few hundred years I have been enjoying the quiet life, so I haven't had the chance to come down here and run into you. Amon chuckled. See, you understand, the quiet life seems to suit us, those who have seen as many years as us. Me in particular, I'm very old, too old. I couldn't stop the chuckle I let out. How old are you, Amon? I asked him. Oh, if I remember correctly, somewhere around 3,300 years old. He said with a shrug. My human years are slightly a blur that I don't remember. I chuckled again. Kid, I'm 4,800 years old. I say to Amon. Amon's mouth slowly opens in shock. No, oh, you joke. He said, waving a hand in the air. No, he isn't. Julius said, as he stepped up next to me. He has kept personal journals about his travels and his life, all of which I have read, or to be more specific I have started to read, but there are thousands of them. The look of shock on Amon's face was hysterical, and never before have I wanted a camera than now. And for my final words I couldn't help myself. There are more things in heaven and earth, Horatio, than are dreamt of in your philosophy. Chapter 42, a place to rest, and old soldiers. Leaving Amon's, we made our way back out into the crowded streets of Alexandria. By now it had already started to get darker, but the number of people walking the streets seemed to have only grown. So, leading the way, I expertly walked us through the throngs of people. "So that was the Amon and Kabi you wrote about all those years ago?" Julius asked me. "Yup," I say, as I pass between a bunched-up group of people. "He doesn't seem like the person you wrote him to be back then. You said he was more confident and had an aura of power about him, but now he seems to lack all of that." "That's because he's not the same man from then, Julius, just like you're not the same person you were when we first met. You physically might be frozen in time, but that doesn't mean you're mentally frozen. We accumulate more experiences, become wiser, more knowledgeable, and gain a deeper understanding of the world around us, changing us through time, into completely different people than who we were." He lost his whole coven, he feels guilty that he lived, changing him through the experience. "I see," Julius said, behind me as we walked. "What are we going to do now, head to the Volturi?" Jane asked. "Not yet, we need to give Julius time to practice using his new abilities so he can shield the both of you before we head that way." Jane was more persistent about wanting to go to the Volturi, and I knew why. It was for her brother Alec, but I knew without a doubt, that the Alec she knew was gone, his mind manipulated and morphed into a completely different person, a cold-hearted lapdog made to follow the orders of Arrow without hesitation or thought of his actions, the perfect vampire guard to do their dirty work. After an hour of walking, we finally arrived back at the ship. "Are we staying here again?" Jane complained. "No, we are staying at a home I have. It's farther down the coast from here, it has some good wildlife there for the both of you to hunt," I said, stepping onto the ship. "Thank everything that is good, being stuck in that cabin was starting to make me go crazy," Jane said, raising her hands to the sky like she was praying to the gods. Once we were all on the ship was pushed away from the dock, and we started to move. As we left, we all stood at the ship's railing, Jane and Julius still wearing their cloaks, watching the other ships that were leaving the harbor. After a few minutes the Alexandria lighthouse came into sight. "That's incredible," Jane said as she looked at the large structure. "Just wait until we go to Rome, then you will see truly massive buildings," Julius said, standing next to Jane. "You have told me stories about your home, but are there truly structures as big as you said?" Jane asked Julius. "Yes, there is," I cut in. Both Julius and Jane turned to look at me, as I leaned both elbows on the wooden railing of the ship. "There once stood a structure called the Colossus of Rhodes. It was built in Greece, right by a harbor named Rhodes. It was a massive statue of the Greek sun god, not as tall as the lighthouse, but this statue stood over 100 feet tall and had a copper crown that when the sun hit it just right, it shined bright, as if it was on fire. You could see it at great distances at sea." "Really?" Jane asked with excitement. "Can we go and see it someday?" she asked. "I wish we could, but it was destroyed many years ago." "Ah," she said, with a frown. "But there are still many things we could go and see someday. After everything is done with the Volturi and the Romanian coven, we can take a few years off to relax and explore." "Like what?" she asked. "I call them the wonders of the world. The wonders of the known world for me, at first would have been the 7 wonders of the ancient world, which I saw most of, but like most things, almost all of them were gone, destroyed by war, or natural disasters, like earthquakes. But there were still many things for them to see. Like the horse race arena I had built, the Imperator Arena, Emperor's Arena, as it became known, was the largest structure in Rome. Of course there was plenty of other large structures, but mine was on a whole different level, and I'm sure in later years, it will be on the 7 wonders of the world list." For the next few hours, as we stood on the deck of the ship, I told both Julius and Jane about the wonders of the ancient world, and how incredible they were to see with my own eyes. Finally, after I finished telling them about the hanging garden of the Byzantines, my small villa came into view. The small villa was in the Roman fashion, built during the rule of Rome. These kinds of villas were popular with the wealthy. Compared to what I lived in back by London, this was a small palace. It was a single-story villa, square-shaped with a courtyard in the middle, with the inside an open design, that allowed the cool breeze to come in, 7 bedrooms, and a wash pool. It was perfect for me. I've had it since the start of the construction on the Gringotts Bank in Alexandria, but I haven't come back since it finished. Luckily I had employees that would come back every week to make sure it stayed clean. It also has a small group of guards here that made sure it wasn't robbed, or vandalized. Slowly the ship approached the small dock that had a path up to the villa. As the ship docked, I saw a group of people standing at the top of the bath, all men wearing swords and breastplates in the old legionaries' fashion, as well as royal purple capes, signifying them as my bank guards. Once the ship was tied to the dock, we stepped off the ship. That's strange. Julius said to my side. What is? I asked him. Not a one of them looks to be under the age 50. He said as he looked at the guards. That's because not one of them is under the age of 50. I said in response. Most of them are in their later years, some too old to continue with their duties at the bank, and don't want to retire, and a few who sustained injuries, we continue to employ, so instead of throwing them out, without a job or anywhere to go, I have the older guards come to the properties I have all over the world and guard them. It's an easy job that pays, as well as a home for them to stay. I say as we walk up the path to the guards. A few yards from the group of 10 guards, one of them steps forward. Stop, who goes? He looked to be mid-50s with salt and pepper hair, clean-shaven, around 6 feet tall, and in great shape for his age. Reaching into one of my pockets I pull out my gold card, and hold it up so he could see the symbol on the card. All the men, almost in sync, went to attention. Sir, said the man who had stepped forward to stop us. Stepping forward I put out my hand to shake his. Nice to meet you, I'm Adam. I say, as his meaty hand swallowed mine almost whole. Hello sir, I am Marcus Augusta, said the large man. Chapter 43, Back to Rome. 2 weeks later. At the moment we are all in the courtyard of my property, me, Julius and Jane. I was currently juggling 4 balls of hard metal. I know what you are thinking, why exactly are you juggling 4 balls of metal? Well, the reason why is because at the moment we are testing Julius's shields. It only took Julius a week to almost master his mental shielding ability. Now he was able to shield himself and Jane at the same time while also being able to use his telekinetic abilities. And now we were doing a little extracurricular work. I figured if Julius can make a mental shield, he could also make a regular shield using his telekinesis. And so far we have made big strides in this ability. At the beginning Julius was only able to make a small shield the size of a frisbee, but now he is able to make one big enough to cover himself whole. Anything bigger and his mental shield would start to weaken. Are you ready? I called out to Julius. Yeah, I'm ready. In a blur of motion, the metallic balls the size of pool balls were launched towards the still figure of Julius. Like gunshots, the metal balls smash into the nearly invisible wall. Unlike the mental shields Julius can make, which is mostly made out of the energy his ability makes, this kind of shield has a slight smoky look to it. And like the many times before, the metal orbs came to a dead stop when they hit Julius's shield, then dropped to the ground, making clunk sounds as they hit the ground. Not bad, I say, as Julius dispersed his shield. I don't think I could do much better while keeping our mental shields in place, he said as he pointed his finger at Jane, who was at the moment reading one of the scrolls I had brought on our trip. Looking at them you couldn't see the orbs that were the mental shields Julius made, unlike before where it looked like small glass space helmets that reflected light around their heads. Now it was impossible to see. Julius had it to perfection, where it was molded to your face, and right under the skin so it wouldn't reflect light. As we were taking a break under some shade, one of the guards came out of one of the doors and made his way towards us. Stopping next to where I was seated, he came to attention and held out his hand, which had a piece of paper in it. Taking the paper I dismissed him, and opened the letter. On the top of the paper was the symbol for the Roman bank head. This letter was one that I was expecting. The day after arriving here at this home, I sent a letter to the Roman bank head, and asked him to send people to watch the Volturi, and to let me know when there are large movements made by the Volturi, and it seems, there must have been something to happen. Sir, the spies I have sent out at your request have sent word to me of a large gathering of people in Volturia, all of which they noted as being perfect beings who wear black and red cloaks. It has also been noted that in the surrounding areas there has been a large number of people going missing. Some are found, others seem to just go missing in the night. Augusta. Folding the letter back up, I couldn't stop the smile that spread across my face. Noting the smile, Julius asked. Was that the response from the Rome bank? I nodded my head. That it was. It seems the Volturi have started to gather their forces in preparation for the fight. Does this mean we will be leaving soon? Jane asked. Yes, we will be leaving tomorrow. And with that started the flurry of preparation for the leave. Packing our belongings we were ready by the next morning. Back in the dark cabin that was our new home for the voyage back to Rome, we all did our own thing to pass the time. which for all of us, was reading. It took 4 days to make it to the main Rome ports. Unlike many other places, Rome's ports were massive, with hundreds of ships coming in and leaving almost constantly, even after falling to the Germanic tribes and a large part of Rome falling, due to war, fire and other natural disasters. But through all of that, Rome still stood as one of the world's largest hubs for trade, with ships coming from all over to trade their goods. Standing on the deck of the ship, Jane and I looked out at the massive swarm of moving ships, while Julius packed up his belongings for when we left the ship. "What do you think will happen?" Jane asked me. I looked over at her. "What do you mean?" "When we meet the Volturi, what do you think will happen?" I looked back at the ships again and thought for a moment. "I think the Volturi will try to do something to anger you, and make you attack them, possibly using your brother to do so." "My brother, why would he help them, for all he knows I'm long dead?" Jane asked, looking up at me. "I'm sure he knows that you are alive." Jane stood dead still, as she processed my words. "Then why is he helping them?" Jane asked in a quiet angry voice. "Because to him, what he's doing now doesn't seem wrong." "I don't understand." "It's the whole reason Julius has been training so hard with his mental shields. The Volturi has a member that can make and change your emotional ties to people, to your brother, no matter what the Volturi does, or makes him do, they are always in the right. But he's my brother, I'm sure as soon as he sees that I'm alive he will change." I shook my head. "It doesn't work that way, even if we kill the vampire that changed him, your brother will stay the same as he is now." Before we could continue the conversation, Julius came to the top deck, and approached us. "I swear, this will be the last time I'm on a ship for the next 100 years, Julius complained as he approached. "Well, we could have swam," I said in response. "Swam, that would have been twice as terrible, swimming for days on end, constantly wet, not thanks, I would rather be on the ship that smells like sweat, shit and other terrible things." I laughed. "Well, we are almost done with this trip," I said as we all turned to look out at the port. Chapter 44, Meeting the Volturi. Wow was all my brain could think as I walked the cramped streets of Rome once again. Following behind me was Julius and Jane, both wearing their white cloaks over their faces. Julius walked at a steady pace, unconcerned of his surroundings, the sights and smells, something he was used to seeing. Jane, on the other hand, was a different story, both Alexandria and now Rome, were whole new experiences for her. A girl born in a small village north of Londinium, she had never left the village her whole life until she was saved by me and Julius. Her head turned in every direction as she absorbed her new surroundings, and smells that came with it. "This is where you were born?" Jane asked Julius. "Yes, I was born farther to the east, but yes, Rome was my home," he said, looking at her with a smile on his face. Something I've picked up on more so lately was the bond both Jane and Julius were developing. For a long time, Jane was distant from both me and Julius, her hatred for humans divided them, but ever since I strongly persuaded her into changing her views of humans, they have grown close, very close. They weren't in a relationship yet, that much I knew, I would hear it, but in my little expertise in the field of love, told me it was bound to happen, and the only thing keeping them apart was the fear they felt for meeting with the Volturi, and the vampire war that was about to be fought. They feared losing one another in the fight to come. It was in the hope that it would hurt less if they weren't in a relationship when one of them died. But I could be wrong. I haven't been in a relationship for over 5,000 years, so what do I know about it? As we were walking, you could see a massive structure in the distance in front of us, and as soon as Jane saw it she had to ask. "What is that?" she asked in an awestruck tone. "That would be my horse chariot arena, the Imperator Arena, Emperor's Arena, ... I said, looking over my shoulder at her. "How incredible!" she said as she looked at it. "I'm a little surprised it's still standing, to be honest." "Why?" Jane asked. "Well, it's a few hundred years old now, and still in use, it's bound to be in some bad shape," I said, as I looked at the structure from a distance, trying to see if I could see any cracks. "It's actually in pretty good shape," Julius said. Turning to look at him, I asked. "And how would you know?" Julius shot me a wide smile. "I get reports every new moon. Anytime there is any damage I approve funds for repairs." I nodded my head, then shrugged my shoulders. "In all truth, I forgot about it for about 100 years. How could you forget something like this?" Jane asked. I chuckled. "Well, when we had it built, it was just a way for us to get rid of some money, by giving it to the people that needed it, that being the workers, it gave jobs to almost 2 generations of people. Jane looked at the back of my head with wide eyes. How much gold do you have? Too much. Julius answered her question with a chuckle. Too damn much. After a few more hours of walking we made it to my old villa where we spent the night, or I spent the night. Jane and Julius went off to hunt. The next morning, we headed north. Thanks to our speed, we ate up the miles. The only problem was the fact that I'm still practically a human with human needs, so every now and then we would need to stop so I could eat or get a drink, and at night I needed to sleep, so with me holding the group back, we made it to Volterra in 4 days. Long gone was the town with only one stone building with the rest being small wooden huts. Now Volterra was a large city of its time with stone buildings and homes. I haven't been here for the last 100 years or so, but over the years I had been here to check on the Volturi. I had seen the town grow. Now most of the buildings were made of stone, with clay roofing. As we walked up the steep hill road that led to the city I spoke to Jane and Julius. Remember what I have told the both of you, they will try to anger you, make you do something with your powers, but you can't show them your powers. If you do, Arrow will try and make you come to his side. I said, stopping to look at the both of them. And let me do all the talking, the both of you just need to stay close to me, and to stay silent no matter what is said. Looking at Julius I say, now would be a good time to put on the mental shields. Julius nodded his head, and closed his eyes, and in a matter of seconds both of them had the shields in place. Ready? I asked them. Both Jane and Julius nodded their heads in the affirmative. So with a nod of my own head we continued up the cobbled road. And within half an hour we were walking the heavily populated streets of Volterra. I led Jane and Julius expertly through the streets to the Volturi's headquarters. It wasn't hard to do since it's been their headquarters since they came here. The only difference was that their headquarters has been improved greatly over the years into a small castle. Finally, after turning a corner it came into sight, the large stone building smack dab in the middle of the city. With confident steps, I lead Julius and Jane to the large metal doors. As we approached I could see a cloaked person standing in the shade the large building gave by the door. As we came closer the person took a slight step forward away from the wall he was leaning against. Stopping before the steps that lead to the door, I waited for the person to speak. And like I knew they would, the person spoke first. What do you want? The man said in a deep gruff voice. I'm here to see the Volturi. What business do you have with the Volturi? Just tell them Adam is here, they will understand. The cloaked man stayed silent for a moment before taking a step back, and knocking on the large metal doors twice. A moment later they opened slightly, and he had a quick conversation with someone on the other side of the door. Once done the door was closed and the awkward silence began. As we waited I looked at the cloaked figure. He was new, or relatively new. It had been a while since I ran into any of the Volturi members, or came to check in with the Volturi. The last time was when we saved Jane, and the members there were the Volturi and their personal guards, not the freshly made vampires. At least he wasn't trying and failing to intimidate me like the vampire who was on guard duty the first time I met the Volturi. After a few more minutes, the doors opened again, this time fully, revealing a nondescript female vampire, who wore the hood of her cloak down, revealing her perfect porcelain skin, and raven black hair. Please follow me, she said, taking a step to the side to allow us entrance. Taking the steps up, we entered the half-castle. The inside was dark and gloomy, candles the only light, leaving long shadows and dark corners. The female vampire led us through a long maze of hallways, past works of art on the walls, as well as stone statues that lined some of the walls. After a few minutes of walking, we finally arrived at another pair of large metal doors. They are waiting for you, the female vampire said as she pushed one of the doors open, with almost no effort. Without giving her a second glance, I stepped past her, and into the large throne room. The soft footsteps of Jane and Julius behind me were the only confirmation that they were following me. Stepping in I looked around, clocking every person in the room. To one side of the throne room was the massive 6'7" figure of Felix, next to him was a smaller man, by the name of Afton. On the other side of the room were 2 vampires I have never seen before. Both were also men, short and nondescript. And of course like before in their thrones were the Volturi heads, Arrow, Marcus, and Caius. Walking steadily to the center of the room, I looked at the 3 of them without an ounce of fear in me or my eyes. If it isn't our oldest friend Adam, Arrow said, in his snarky tone. I wouldn't say friend, we are acquaintances, nothing more, nothing less. Arrow let out a chuckle. Why of course Adam, he said, as he tapped one of his fingers to his gold throne. Looking over my shoulder, Arrow spoke again. And I see you brought some friends. They are members of my own coven. How preposterous! Caius cut in. In what way? I asked. You are no vampire. Clearly I am not, but I am immortal like a vampire. I am as strong and as fast as a vampire. Who says I cannot have a coven like a vampire? Humans are fallible, which you are. It takes a vampire to run a coven without error. He snapped. I let out a chuckle. So you call yourself infallible? If so, that is your greatest weakness. Because you do make mistakes. In what way? Marcus finally spoke. Let me break it down for you, Barney style, I said with a chuckle that only I would understand. You have limited knowledge. You don't possess complete knowledge or understanding of all situations and individuals. It's impossible to. You rely on your own experiences, interpretations, and information sources, which can lead to errors in judgment. Second, subjectivity. Your decisions are influenced by personal biases, beliefs, and emotions, which can cloud your judgments and prevent all of you from making objective and impartial decisions. Then my favorite is your power dynamic. Your authority and power has led all of you to become arrogant with a sense of invincibility, which clearly makes all of you overconfident and blind to your own weaknesses, making you susceptible to mistakes or miscalculations. Then there's the changing circumstances. The world is constantly evolving, and new challenges and threats can emerge that you, the Volturi, may not be fully prepared for. Your strategies and methods will become outdated or ineffective in the face of these changes. And last but not least, the external opposition. Since you have formed the Volturi, you have been fighting tooth and nail for every ounce of power you have received, but come on, how long will you keep pushing your luck before the other vampire covens get tired of your rule and oppression before they band together to take you down? The throne room was dead silent as I finished my long rant. For a long full minute not a sound was made by anyone in the throne room, while a look of bewilderment grew on the faces of the three Volturi heads. Looking at Caius, I said, "If you wish I could continue." "I don't believe that will be necessary," Arrow said, raising one of his hands. After another moment of getting themselves mentally on track, after the hard facts I just dropped on their heads, Arrow spoke again. "And what brings you here, Adam?" "You know why I am here, Arrow." "Unfortunately I don't," he said, leaning back in his chair. I let out a sigh. "I know you are gathering your forces, which I'm guessing is to take on the Romanian coven, and like I told you all those years ago, I'm going to help take them down." Once again, Arrow tapped a finger to his throne. "And why should I allow you to go?" I laughed. "Like you could stop me from going. And let's be honest, Arrow, you could use every extra weapon on your side as you can get." A corner of Arrow's face rose slightly in a small smile. "True. But how am I to know that your friends are strong enough to hold up in a fight?" he asked, with a small smile on his lips. I smirked. "The only way you will find out is on the battlefield." A sneer rose on Caius's face. "This is no game, we must know the powers of those we are bringing, we can't afford any weak links." He spat. I pointed at myself. "Do you consider that I am weak link?" He didn't respond. "I have trained them well, and I know I can trust them, and that's all that matters." Caius opened his mouth to speak again, but was cut off by Arrow's raised hand. Then he turned his head to one of the nondescript vampires that was to our sides and behind us. In a blurry, he was gone, and out the large metal doors. Confused at the vampire's actions, I turned my head slightly to look at the large doors that were now slightly opened. A moment later the sounds of footsteps could be heard in the hallway. And a moment later walked in Alec, Jane's brother. Chapter 45, That Hurt. Alec walked into the large room with a steady stride, his footfalls making hard thuds on the marble floor. Out of the corner of my eyes I saw Jane twitch slightly to move to her brother, but before she could make a move, she went completely still again. Looking at Julius, he gave me a slight nod of his head. Me and Julius knew that when Jane saw her brother she would react. We didn't know what she would do, but we thought it best to stop her before she even approached him, so me and Julius decided to stop her with Julius's telekinetic powers holding her in place before anything could happen. Leaving my thoughts, I looked back at Alec. I watched as he approached the seated Volturi, going up the few steps that raised the Volturi above any they were talking to. Alec stopped and stood right behind Arrow's gold and black throne. I couldn't stop the chuckle that fell from my lips. "And you attempt to bait us?" I said, putting both of my hands behind me. With a small grin Arrow spoke. Bait you? No, I only wish for a reunion of two lost family members. Pfft, you are not as funny as you might think, Arrow. I said. Oh, I think I have my moments. Pointing a finger at Alec's emotionless face I say. Maybe it would be a good reunion of two siblings, if he was still her brother. Turning his head Arrow looked at Alec then back to us. He is clearly her brother Adam. No he isn't even a shell of the same person he once was. You used your manipulation bitch to alter his mind, making him your perfect weapon, killing the old Alec. Arrow shrugged at my words. So what? We gave him a purpose, an opportunity to be a part of something bigger than he ever would have in that run-down village that was ready to kill him. You let him be a part of something bigger than himself. I said with a big laugh. What a jest, you didn't give him anything, all you did was take from him, you took him away from his sister, you took away his free will, you took away what makes him himself. I said, slowly getting louder and louder, until I was yelling at them. Not because I was mad, but to intimidate them. The Volturi have been getting bolder since I haven't been checking up with them lately, which made them only get more confident. Chuckling Arrow looked over my shoulder at Jane, who hadn't moved since Alec entered, and Julius stopped her. And you, do you have anything to say? Arrow asked. When Jane stayed still Arrow continued. No, well then, that's fine. I could see the frustration starting to creep into his movements because we refused to rise to the bait, the tapping of his finger on his throne, or the unusual amount of movements he was making. When will we be leaving? I finally asked. The room went silent for another moment before Arrow spoke again. In 2 days, once we receive the needed stock for our journey we will be leaving. I knew what he meant by stock. It was the slaves the Volturi will be using on the trip. The reason why was because while they were traveling, the number of vampires that the Volturi had in their army could wipe out entire villages. Long ago they started buying older criminals or those who surrendered in war and became slaves. The Volturi bought the slaves from some king in the Far East at a cheap price, giving the Volturi good sustenance for their army, while not emptying half a region of its human life. Of course if they wished they could just kill villages for their food, but the Volturi had already started pressuring other covens to go to ground and become shadows to the world, and to start following the rules of the Volturi. In doing so, the Volturi had to follow their own rules as well, because they knew if they forced all the coven to follow rules that they themselves neglect, it could start wars that they would rather not have. If large amounts of villages were drunk dry, that might cause problems from some king or another, and with Christianity becoming so big, it wouldn't take much for some religious king to start a holy war with vampire kind because he thinks they are the spawn of the devil. So to avoid that and to stay under the radar, the Volturi turned to another disgusting practice, slavery. Buying humans none would miss by the hundreds. The Volturi would take them like a herd of cattle on their march to war, or when they went to take down one coven or another. The only time they would do so would be when all of the Volturi were gathered together for a fight. If it was just the Volturi heads and their guards, it was unneeded. Not wanting to spend any more time here than needed, I turned to leave. Turning I saw Julius standing next to Jane with a hand on her shoulder, while giving her the use of her legs back so she could walk. Following behind me we walked calmly to the large metal doors, but in Arrow fashion he spoke again. And who said you could leave? He said in an apathetic tone. Stopping dead in my tracks I let out a sigh. This bitch, I thought. Turning around, I looked back up at the Volturi heads. I could see the smile on Arrow's and Caius's faces, while Marcus just sat there looking like he wanted to be dead. But before I could get a word out, both of the nondescript vampires in the corner of the throne room moved. In blurs, both came towards me at full speed. Not needing to think about my actions, I launched myself at them as well, meeting them halfway. My speed was faster than any vampire any of them had seen, shocking all in the room, even Julius and Jane. Because for the first time they had seen me go full out and using full force. Which surprised them even more. During all of their training together, both Julius and Jane thought that I was an opponent that could be defeated, but that my skills in combat is what always put me above them, at what they thought was a reachable distance, but instead was something they could only dream of. Now they saw it was never just the skill difference that let me surpass them, but instead the hidden power stored in me that gave me the advantage. In a blur of speed that even the present vampires almost missed, I appeared in front of the two vampires. With both hands out, I grabbed onto their faces, bringing them to a dead stop, or at least partially, because only the heads came to a stop, while their momentum carried their bodies forward, decapitating their heads from their bodies, their own speed tearing their heads off for me. Now with both heads in my hands I looked up at Arrow, but was only met with a black as night fog moving right for me. Dropping the heads, I stood still. I watched the black fog surround me and circle around me, but as soon as the fog surrounded me, I started to chuckle. Because unlike what his powers might do to regular people or vampires, which was to take away all of their senses, like sight, touch, sound, and smell, his powers didn't affect me. Instead it was like semi-black smoke that swirled around me. Yes, it was thick smoke, but I could still see through most of it. As the black fog swirled around me, I waited for something to happen, and like I thought, a massive foot appeared through the fog. Reacting on instinct, I grabbed the foot before it could hit me, and pulled the owner of the foot into the smoke with me. As I pulled them into the smoke, I saw that it was Felix. "Well, hello there, big guy," I said, as I grabbed onto the collar of his clothes and launched him into the air and straight towards a wall. As he hit the wall, the stone wall shook and a few chunks fell as he fell to the ground in clear pain. As he hit the wall, the black smoke retreated back into Alec's hands. Turning, I checked on Jane and Julius and saw that they were both still standing by the door. So turning back to the Volturi heads. "If I can deal with your guards, then trust me when I say my 2 coven members are more than enough for anyone." Errol let out a laugh. "But you are forgetting one," he said. And at that same moment a hand grabbed me from behind. A hand went around my back and grabbed onto my chin and pulled me back, and before I knew it I could feel teeth sinking into the flesh of my neck. "Right, Sue, yeah. The MC was finally bitten by a vampire. I'm sure you are wondering how this vampire was able to get close to the MC and bite him. Well, the vampire that bit him is Afton. He is the mate of mind manipulation vampire. His ability is psychic invisibility. So he can go invisible to others by altering if others can see him or not. Now in the book and movies it's a mental ability which Julius's shield should have been able to neglect and they should have seen him get close to the MC, but in this world I made it to where his ability is just self-invisibility, not an ability that needed to enter your mind to work so Julius and Jane couldn't see him. The reason I did it now was because I wanted him to get his powers before fighting the Romanian coven. Guess what his power will be here? Chapter 46, Power. Third-person POV. As the teeth bit into Adam flesh, a small splatter of blood entered the vampire's mouth, before he was ripped away from Adam by Julius's powers. As the vampire was ripped from Adam, the vampire's teeth removed a chunk from Adam's neck, while the hand that had grabbed onto Adam's face twisted Adam's head into a strange angle, staggering Adam. Adam stood in place for a moment as blood ran steadily down his neck. But before the eyes of the Volturi, they watched as the gushing wound knitted itself together in seconds. Then with a crack Adam's head wiped forward and back into a proper position, but he didn't move, he just stood there as still as the dead. The vampire that bit Adam floated in the air by Julius, writhing and grunting midair in pain. Before anyone knew what was happening, the floating vampire started to flake into specks of dust. First slowly, but in seconds the limbs started falling to the ground and exploding into a sparkling dust. And after 5 seconds the torso was gone and soon followed the head. The sparkling dust floated into the air, causing the little light that filled the room to sparkle off the partials that floated in the air. What happened to the vampire took everyone's attention away from Adam, who still had yet to move. Adam POV. System alert, system alert. Cell mutation detected by invasive substance, checking mutation properties, properties detected. This cell mutation will cause death. Cell crystallization. Cell reform. Cell restructuring into peak abilities. Dietary change to a blood-based diet where cells receive substance from said blood. Error could not be found. Host death must be avoided, cleansing invasive substances from host. Error. Error could not be cleansed from the host's body. All other invasive changes have been cleansed from the host's body through system cell interference, closing off cells to mutation of invasive properties. Error. Error, unknown, has been detected in the host's brain and cells, unable to cleanse error from host's body. Running diagnostics, brain frequency has altered, non-life-threatening, or invasive to host, acceptance granted to error. Error will be added to the system archive. What the fuck just happened? I thought as I felt anew, something coursing through me. Turning my head I looked at Julius and Jane to make sure they were okay. As I looked at them I could see small sparkling specks floating through the room. It wasn't very hard to figure out what that was when I noticed the pile of sparkling dust at Julius's feet. "Did you ground him to dust? How long was I out?" I asked him, momentarily forgetting about the Volturi heads who were still in their thrones. "I didn't, he just fell apart," Julius said. "What?" I asked, confused. "He just appeared out of nowhere before I could react and bit you," he said. I pulled him off you in less than a second, but when I pulled him off of you he took a chunk of you with him, then in a matter of seconds he was, well, dust. Bringing my hand up I touched the side of my neck where I could feel the warm blood. My blood. I thought. I had never had a vampire drink my blood before, so had no idea what would happen if one drank my blood, until now. My guess is the fact of the healing ability that is in me, from the cells from the skin the vampire tore away, along as in the blood the vampire consumed. My healing ability entering a dead being could only spell bad shit happening. Crack. Turning my head I saw Felix standing to his feet, making cracking sounds as he healed from him hitting the wall. Him making a sound reminded me of the Volturi who sat in their thrones and observed our actions, and what had happened. Turning my head I looked at them with a cold expression on my face, pissed at their actions. When that strange feeling started to make its presence known again. Like a tingling zap, the feeling shot from the tips of my toes to my skull, while a purple light started to glow from me. At the moment I couldn't tell where from, but somewhere I couldn't see. The purple light that came from me shined off the flakes of vampire that still floated in the air, causing the room to take on a purple hue. Fascinating. Arrow said with a deranged smile on his face as he watched me. But before Arrow could continue to enjoy the sight, a semi-clear purple shockwave escaped from me. Like a wave, the purple hue shot from me and into the world, causing the throne room to shake from the force of the shockwave, causing cracks to form on the walls of the room and floor, along with throwing everyone in the room back. The 3 Volturi heads were thrown through their thrones and back to land next to Alec, while Felix was thrown into the wall again. Thankfully Julius managed to throw up a shield before the shockwave hit him and Jane. While I on the other hand was burning alive. The feeling of fire mixed with lightning coursed through me. But in the middle of my torture another pulse shot out again, doing more damage to the room. Host. Error has been identified. Molecular cell mutation, scanning mutation, mutation identified, mutation aura manipulation, abilities unknown, found. Cells have become aura charged, allowing the host to manipulate one's own aura. Mutation acceptable. Now I would have heard the system say that if I wasn't in agonizing pain at the moment. Because at the moment there was nothing that filled my head but pain. After a few moments my pain reached an unbearable point of agony. I let out a blood-curtailing scream. And with one final shock wave of purple aura, that caused chunks to fall from the ceiling, it all came to an abrupt stop. Falling to my knees, I took deep breaths as I pushed the remaining twitches of pain to the back of my mind for later. Adam, I heard someone yell from behind me, I think it was Jane. But I was too tired to move at the moment to check. A second later I felt a hand grab onto my shoulder. Adam, are you all right? Julius asked. But I couldn't answer him at the moment, my body felt too tired to answer at the moment. Come on, we need to get him out of here. Julius said to Jane. Be careful not to touch his blood, you saw what it did to that other guy. Julius added to Jane. Slowly they lifted me up, Julius putting one of my arms around his neck to carry me out while Jane led the way out. As I was partially carried/dragged out, I thought about what the fuck just happened. Checking the interface I saw my system had a message on it. Slowly reading it, my jaw dropped. I got a superpower, I got a superpower. I mentally yelled in excitement. Aura manipulation. So let me go over some stuff that might be confusing. He is still human, the system purged the venom from his system but was unable to purge the power aspect of the venom. Arrow is super deranged and has some serious mental issues, he has a problem with anyone or any group that might be stronger than the Volturi, that's why he had his guards attack, because in his deranged mind he thought none could beat his strongest. Adam took them on so Julius and Jane wouldn't have to show their powers to the Volturi, but as shown Julius was forced to show his powers. Which may cause problems with Arrow in later years. Adam is still going to fight with the Volturi to take down the Romanian coven. But in this chapter, Julius and Jane thought it was a good idea to get Adam away from the Volturi. The reason Adam is joining with the Volturi to fight the Romanian coven was because to him it's a way to clean some of the blood of the villagers off his hands. He knows that the Volturi will win the fight, and we must also remember that the Volturi don't have Jane anymore, so the fight might not turn out the same as the old world. Chapter 47, Retribution. Wait, I said to Julius who was still guiding me outside. What, are you okay? He asked in a worried tone. Yeah, I'm fine. I said, standing on my own feet again. What's wrong? Jane asked. Nothing's wrong, there's just one more thing I've gotta do. I said. What else is there to do, Adam? Julius asked, annoyed. Smirking, I told him. That's my business, you and Jane should head to the regroup area I showed the both of you, I'll be there soon. But... nothing, I just remembered I told Arrow something a while ago, and it seems I have to remind him, the both of you keep out of sight and move fast, if anyone tries to stop you use your powers. I told them, turning around to head back to the Volturi's throne room. As I walked back through the hallway I heard their fast footsteps as they ran full speed through the halls and out of here. With a steady stride I walked back into the large room, making sure to avoid the pile of vamp dust on the floor. As I came in I could see the Volturi heads just starting to get their feet back under them, and standing up. Small crack lines ran along their faces from the sheer force the waves hit them with. Felix on the other hand wasn't moving. Looking at him I could see that part of his head was missing, looking up I saw what did the damage. It was a touch holder that was embedded into the wall, he must have shot back and hit his head against it. Oh well, they will put him back together once I'm done here. Looking back at the Volturi leaders a small smile spread across my face. I told you Arrow, I told all of you if you fucked with me I would tear you to pieces, didn't I? I yelled to them as I slowly made my way closer to them. None of them answered as I went up the steps and past their broken thrones. I mean really, is it that hard to get through your skulls that I'm stronger than you? I told you I'm much older than all of you combined, and yet you still test my patience, by testing me and my patience, hoping I would die so you could take my members from me. I said, standing only a few feet from them now. Well let me tell you this, either of them could have taken all of you down with as much ease as I did, but they wouldn't have held back, because they don't care if you lived or not, and to tell you the truth I'm starting to feel the same. The only reason you are still alive now is because I didn't want to take your role as the leader of the vampire race all those years ago, but to tell you the truth I'm starting to think differently, I could kill all of you then lead the vampire race for a few 100 years before I pick someone to take my place then I go on my merry way. The look of shock on their faces was hilarious and almost made me laugh at the sight, but at the moment I needed to keep the cold expression on my face, to really drive home the fear I was putting into them. But I'm not quite at the point where I want to spend hundreds of years doing that, I said. A look of relief shone on their faces, but not for long. But that doesn't mean you aren't going to pay for what you did, I said, and let an evil smile appear on my face. Marcus tried to say, before I grabbed him by his neck, before he could react or even see my move. Grabbing his neck, I kicked one of his knees as hard as possible, breaking the leg backwards and in half at the knee, causing him to let out a scream of pain, and to drop down on his one remaining knee, putting him at the perfect height for me to twist his head around, and off his shoulders. Now holding the head by the hair, I raised it to face Caius and Arrow, who were both wide-eyed in shock. Just then Alec, who I had forgotten, lunged at me hoping to distract me long enough to let the other two Volturi heads time to escape. Because as soon as he lunged, Caius and Arrow took off for the door. As soon as Alec was in range, I twisted my body around and kicked Alec in the side, launching him hard into one of the pillars that stood behind the Volturi's thrones. As soon as Alec was kicked, I ran full speed past the Volturi heads to the large metal doors, and stopped in their way. Both Arrow and Caius came to skidding halts in front of me, and with the evil smile still on my face, I used Arrow's own words. And who said you could leave? Both Caius and Arrow were now wide-eyed in fear, which only made my smile widen even more. And in a flash, I punched Arrow in the chest, launching him backwards. Then I twisted around and grabbed Caius by his bright gold locks. You were the most annoying, I said to him as I pulled his head back, and grabbed his chin then pulled his hair as hard as I could, causing Caius to open his mouth in a cry of pain. Taking the opening, I let go of his hair and chin and shoved my hands into his mouth, grabbing the top row with one hand and the bottom with the other. I then pulled in separate directions with a burst of strength ripped the top of his head off above his mouth. You killed them, I heard Arrow yell from where he had fallen. Turning to look at him, I let out a chuckle. No I didn't, they are just fine, you can put them back together when I'm done with you, I said, slowly walking to his prone position. How could I do that if you rip my head off? Arrow snarled at me. Simple, I don't rip your head off, I said with a chuckle. A look of confusion crossed Arrow's face before I made my move. Grabbing one of his legs, I brought it up then pulled it in the opposite direction than it was supposed to bend and broke it off. A scream filled the room as I pulled his leg off. I told you Arrow, I told you not to test me, and what did you do? I asked the still screaming Arrow, but didn't get a response. That's right, you tested me, and this is the price for doing so, I said, grabbing the other leg and doing the same thing. This time he let out a higher-pitched scream. Painful, isn't it? I asked him, but again didn't get a response to the question. Yeah, I made it quick for the other two, but I wanted to make sure you really got the point this time. Stepping to his side, I crouched down to get close to his face. Now, when we go with you to take care of the Romanians, I better not even see any of you looking in my direction or I won't hesitate to kill all of you, and I mean kill. Understood? I asked. Arrow nodded his head quickly. Good. I said with a smile, then looking down I saw Arrow's arm. Oh wait, I forgot one. I said with a small laugh, then broke Arrow's arm off. Through his screams I told him. You only need one. And with a chuckle I tossed the arm over my shoulder. And with a "see you around" I walked out of the room, where all that could be heard was Arrow's cries of pain. As I neared the exit of the Volterra base, I came across the female vampire that had led us through the base earlier, except it seems she tried to stop Julius and Jane, because at the moment she was embedded into the stone wall, with the sword sticking out of her brain. Talk about the wrong people to try and stop, one who can mentally burn you alive and the other can literally destroy you with a wave of his hands, I said aloud to myself as I walked past the new artwork Julius and Jane had left for the Volturi. Opening the large door to the outside world, I saw it was almost dusk. Taking a step out, I stepped on another body. I instantly knew who it was. It was the decapitated body of the guard that had stood by the door earlier. Ouch, I hope they put you back together, you seemed like a cool dude, I said with a chuckle as I stepped over him, and down the steps into the small city. One more chapter then the battle begins. Chapter 48, My Bad. Running at full speed through the town, I couldn't stop the smile that spread across my face. Never before had I felt more alive than at the moment, not at the fact that I just beat the ever-living shit out of the Volturi heads, but it was just a feeling that ran through me like that feeling you get as a kid when it's a few days from a holiday or your birthday, like I was overflowing with a weird type of energy. As I ran, I opened my interface and played some feel-good tunes. Scrolling through my own playlist I settled on Blame from a band called B.B. Cooper. At this point I was reaching the end of the town, so with a smile on my face and good music blasting in my head, I ran full out, the feeling of air rushing past my ears and through my hair felt magical. As I ran, I noticed the purple glow had appeared again, causing me to come to a complete stop as I looked down at myself. I'm glowing, I thought as I looked down at a light purple hue that seemed to radiate from me. It's the same glow as when I was in the Volturi's throne room, I thought as I watched the purple hue. Remembering the shockwaves I produced, I stuck one of my hands out, and mentally willed the energy out of my palm. And promptly got launched off my feet as a massive wave of purple left my hand. It launched me 20 feet backwards and straight into a tree. The crack boom of me hitting the tree could probably be heard from miles away. The impact broke a few parts of my spine, along with some of my ribs, as the tree morphed and broke, at my impact. Slowly sitting up I let out a groan, while I felt the pops and cracks, all over my body as the broken bones healed themselves back together. Finally, after a minute to reorient myself, I looked at the carnage the shock wave produced. In front of me, what was once thick forest, was now what looked to me like a war zone. With trees uprooted and fallen for 100 feet in front of me and 15 feet wide, I couldn't help but look at it all stunned. My bad, I said in astonishment. Then bringing my hands up to my face, I looked at the same hands I have seen millions of times before, but unlike before, now they seemed so much more deadlier. Standing back up to my feet, I decided not to try a shock wave again, and instead to try and control the energy. So like before, I put out my right hand and willed the energy to slowly creep from my palm, and before my eyes, a small ball of purple slowly crept out. But unlike the orb Julius' fist made to make his mind shield, this orb looked unstable and like choppy rippling water. Not wanting it to get too unstable and blow me up, I willed the orb tighter, and on mental command, the orb shrunk down and into what looked like a purple see-through bowling ball. Wow, I said, in excitement. Thinking of what I should do now, I pondered on this orb's utility. Then remembering something I read in a book, I thought, maybe I can make it into a weapon. I had my sword but I didn't fully trust it, it was a metal, and all it would take is one nick of the ball and me not noticing and swing and hit a vampire for it to break. Which kinda hurt to think about. I learned blacksmithing for years to make one blade, and now to think of it as a faulty object hurts. So concentrating, I imagined a short sword. Slowly the orb morphed and straightened itself out, into something that resembled a short sword. That is if short swords were a see-through glowing purple. Moving my hand forward, I grabbed the handle of the sword and weighed it in my hand. I can't even feel the weight, I thought as I swung the sword. Looking around I saw a felled tree, so moving over to the remaining stump, I swung the sword into it. Thunk! What the hell? I said out loud to myself. The aura sword didn't do anything to the stump but scratch a piece of bark. Looking at the blade I saw that the edge was rounded instead of sharp like a normal sword. Oh, I just thought of a sword, not a sharp sword. Concentrating I willed the edge to be sharp instead of rounded. And slowly I watched as the edge tapered to a sharp edge. With a smile of success on my face I tried again. Crack, bunk. This time the sword managed to cut into the wood about an inch. I thought it would be better, I said as I looked at the aura sword. As I was looking at the sword it started to flicker and waver. But before I could will it to be stable again, the sword evaporated from my grip. What the hell, I thought as I watched it deteriorate. Confused at what just happened I tried to will back the sword but couldn't. Closing my eyes, and concentrating on the image of a short sword again, I tried one more time. But again got nothing. Breathing hard I wondered, maybe I can only use so much at once. Looking over at the forest I accidentally destroyed, I mumbled, probably used up all the energy on that blast. But needing to get back to Julius and Jane, I moved in the direction I told them to meet me at. Running through the woods again, my brain was running rampant with different ideas of how I could use my new ability. After a few more minutes of running, I came to the old abandoned campsite we used for our regrouping area. Looking around I couldn't see any signs of Jane or Julius. Just when I was about to start looking I heard a creak from above me. Looking up, I saw Jane and Julius sitting on a tree branch a few dozen feet above me, in the thick tree limbs of a tree. Oh, looky there, if it isn't two lovebirds sitting in a tree, I said jokingly to them. The face Jane made it clear that if she had blood, it would have been a blush. Hey old man, don't be petty that we can actually find love, while you stick to one night stands with a different woman every time. Julius shot back. You know, to some that could be considered quite the accomplishment and not the slur of character you intend it to be, I said back with a chuckle. Stepping out of the way, I watched as Jane and Julius dropped down from the tree branches, and back down to earth. Standing up from his crouch, Julius was the first to speak. So what happened, why did you go back? Like I said, I needed to remind Arrow of something I told him about many years ago. And that would be? Julius pressed. That if you mess with me, I'll really make you regret it. And what of my brother? Jane asked, as she stepped to the side of Julius. I let out a small sigh, and looked her in the eyes. Jane, I'm sorry but your brother is gone. I watched for any emotion on her face or any sign she might attack me out of anger. But nothing, she did nothing, didn't make a move, or was there a single twitch of her face to show her emotions, just a blank mask. So I continued. When she gets in your head, and she changes you, it can't be fixed. Even if I killed her, he would stay the same, and if I somehow got her to fix him, the damage done to his brain, well, it wouldn't be pretty. All the while Jane stayed silent, and listened to my words. But once I was done speaking, Jane finally did. In the Volturi's throne room, you said he was already dead, is that true? I nodded my head. Yes, did you see his eyes? I asked Jane. She nodded her head. So you saw how they were glassed over, lifeless. Again she nodded. Those aren't the eyes of the living, they are the eyes of the dead, no emotion, no feelings, just nothing. We fell silent at my words. Can you promise me something? Jane asked softly. Of course, I said. After this fight with the Romanian coven, kill him. Your brother? I asked. Yes, kill him, because I know he would rather be dead than be some puppet for those people, she said with anger in her voice. I nodded my head. I can do that. Even as my brain ran through the problem of me killing Alec would bring me with the Volturi. But I had a feeling after what I did to them today, they wouldn't have much of a problem. Kinda had to rush this one, so please let me know if there are any issues. And heads up, the next chapter will be coming tomorrow. The first half will have the MC exploring his powers a bit more, and the second half will start the journey to war. Chapter 49, and so it begins. After starting a fire, and putting a slice of meat from one of the deers Julius and Jane drank from, on a stick to cook over the fire, we sat in silence, listening to the crack and pop of the small fire. After a few good minutes of cooking in the flames, I pulled out the kebab and started to blow cool air onto it so I couldn't hurt myself. Wouldn't you just heal if you burned your mouth, Jane asked. Of course I would, but that doesn't mean I want to burn my mouth. I might heal from it, but I can still feel the pain. I said, letting the deer kebab cool off. She slowly nodded her head. Taking a bite from the still smoking piece of deer meat, I looked up at the night sky through the trees above. As I was watching the beautiful night sky, Julius asked. Did you find anything out about your power? I shrugged my shoulders. Sort of. What did you find out? Julius asked. While taking a bite of the deer meat, I raised my left hand, and slowly let the aura energy leave my hand, to morph itself into a small ball. That's it? Julius asked. What happened to the whole massive waves you were making back in the throne room? He asked. I stared at him, and raised an eyebrow, then released the energy I was keeping in a ball. The orb exploded into a large wave of purple force, right into a tree a couple of feet away from us. The force from the small billiard-sized ball of aura energy was enough to blow part of the tree facing us off, while also causing it to break in half and fall over away from us. I raised my other brow and asked. You were saying? Both Julius and Jane stared open-mouthed at the carnage the small aura ball could cause. Is that all? Jane asked excitedly. Nope. I said with a smile. Raising my hand again, I imagined the short sword again. As the sword morphed itself into shape, Jane and Julius watched in amazement as the energy slowly took the shape of a sword. The problem is, it's not that sharp. I said in a moody tone. I can only make it so sharp. I continued before we fell silent again. After a few moments of silence Julius spoke. Your sword is sharp, right, the real one. You always refuse to use it because of how sharp it is, and you are afraid that if you use it could break. Julius asked. Yeah, it's insanely sharp, but I'm always afraid to use it because of how old it is, and all it would take is one small nick to break the blade in battle. I said. What if you did what I do with my mind shields, but a little different, put it so close to the blade and edge that it takes on the edge's sharpness itself, so instead of the blade cutting, it will be that energy you can use. Julius said. Now my eyes went wide. I'm such an imbecile, I thought, while mentally shaking my forehead. Going to my pack, we had stashed here, I opened a rolled woven blanket, and pulled out my sword. For it being nearly 2,000 years old, it's still in pristine condition from the constant care I give the blade. Maybe that's why I'm so reluctant to use it. When you spend years learning something just to make one item, then you make it, then you practically fall in love with it, kinda like cars. You buy a nice fancy car for yourself, to drive, but it ends up as your most prized possession and it just ends up sitting in the garage as something to look at. We all have that one family member with an old car in the garage that they never drive but love to stare at. Now with the blade I return to the fire and sit down. Right here goes nothing. I say, before I slowly released the energy, imagining the aura surrounding the blade. As the purple energy slowly crept from my hand and onto the blade, I watched as it morphed to the blade, slowly taking on its shape perfectly. But it didn't feel right, so slowly I pushed the energy tighter around the blade until the purple hue of the energy started to creep into the blade itself, until finally I couldn't push out any more energy into the blade. Looking at the now glowing blade in my hands, I couldn't help the childish laugh that escaped my lips. Standing to my feet, I walked to one of the nearby trees, maybe 5 feet in diameter, and quite tall. Now with the perfect testing object in front of me I swung the blade, and with an almost silent ching the blade cut through the thick tree like a hot knife through butter, causing the once large and alive tree to fall over with a crash. I stared down at the slightly glowing blade and thought. I'm a Jedi. Incredible. Julius shouted. I know. I said back excitedly. With that, you could be unstoppable. Julius said. But just then the glow that was emanating from the blade slowly started to dim. Oh right. I said as I watched the light leave the blade. Must not have given it enough time to recharge. I thought. What happened? Julius asked, as he approached me. I think I can only hold so much energy at once. I said, turning the sword in my hands. I used up quite a lot on the way over here, so I probably haven't recharged yet. That might be a problem. Do you think it's like my power where you just need to practice with it to build up your power with it? Julius asked. I don't know, possibly. I said. Well, I guess I can practice while we wait for the Volturi to be ready, I said, walking back to my pack to put the sword back with my pack. For the next week I continuously practiced with my ability, and let me tell you, wow, my ability has massive destruction capabilities when I use it for shock waves, or as I found out, small shock bullets, where I create a small aura energy ball the size of a gumball, and launch it at something. As soon as it hits its target it will explode with a force akin to a stick of dynamite. Or I can push all the energy out at once and cause one massive wave. What we also found out was how much energy I can use. I can do 7 full-sized and consecutive shock waves straight, before needing to wait 15 minutes to recharge. With my sword I learned that I didn't need to completely cover the blade in my aura energy, but instead just keep the energy on the sharp edges of the blade, which made the energy usage practically unnoticeable. On the 8th day of our training, I heard the fast approaching sound of footfalls. Stopping my aura blade training, I turned in the direction of the footsteps and prepared myself for a possibly hostile enemy approaching. I wasn't the only one to notice either. Both Jane and Julius stopped the practice fight they were currently in to also turn towards the oncoming noise. After another moment, a middle-aged man with dark brown hair and crimson eyes ran out of the woods and into the clearing of tree stumps I had made while practicing with my aura sword. The sight of the clearing full of fallen trees and trunks made the vampire come to a complete halt, as his eyes roamed the small sea of fallen trees. The vampire was about 100 yards from where we stood. As he did so, I saw that the vampire was wearing the red and black cloak of the Volturi. So wanting to know if he brought news from the Volturi, I raised a hand then called out to him. "Can we help you?" As soon as I spoke, the vampire's head shot in my direction, but the sight of me with no shirt on made him pause again, and I don't blame him. Julius likes to use the word barbarian to describe the look I tend to take on. Let me explain, I have a bad habit of forgetting to cut my hair, and well, it can get pretty long before it starts to become an annoyance to be where I then cut it. At the moment my hair hung halfway down my back, while on the temple area I had braided the hair in long braids that fell down onto my chest. And since I had been training, I took off my tunic so I wouldn't get too hot. So at the moment the vampire was looking at a large 6'3" man with the best physique he had ever seen holding a glowing sword, yet. But after a moment to reset his mind, the vampire zoomed to stand in front of us. "How did you find us?" I asked the vampire as soon as he stopped in front of me. "I can track, that's my ability." The vampire stammered out. What do you want?" I asked him. "I was sent by the Volturi to let you know we will be leaving tomorrow at dusk," he said. I nodded my head and a smile spread across my face. And so it begins. Word 1,608. Chapter 50, The Battle. 15 days later. "Well, this sucks," I thought as I walked with my pack through a muddy field. Since the start of the trip it's been nothing but rain and mud the whole way. Thankfully today it was just cloudy instead of pouring rain, making the whole trip one miserable mess for me. At the moment, me, Julius and Jane were about half a mile in front of the Volturi forces, because I thought it better to just keep them away from them. The smell of blood from the blood feasts the Volturi have every few days was intense, and even a mile away put Jane and Julius to a test of their willpower. We had already had a run-in with a group of vampires when we first passed by a town almost a week ago. Instead of fighting or trying to hide, they decided to retreat and probably give word to the Romanian heads. Speaking of the Volturi army, I was a bit miffed at it. In total the Volturi only had 500 fighters. The 3 ruling heads, their guards, which were 10 of their strongest fighters, and the rest were vampires with slightly stronger abilities. Which for a vampire army is very respectable, but from what I know of the Romanian coven, is that they weren't on top because of their good looks, it's because of their sheer numbers. The Romanian coven probably has at most 1,000 vampires on their side. And even though we might have some stronger than normal vampires on our side, that won't matter when that stronger vampire is fighting 3 vampires at once. As we were walking, I saw a small group of vampires blurring in our direction as they came over a rise of a small hill. From the red and black colors in their blur, I could tell it was the scouts that the Volturi had sent out to look for the Romanian forces in front of the Volturi army. Watching them pass by us, I looked at Jane and Julius and said, "I guess they found the Romanian coven," I said, looking back at the small hill the scouts had come from. A small smile appeared on my face. "Let's go see what we can see," I told Jane and Julius, before blurring to the top of the hill to look around. As soon as I came to a stop I looked, and instantly saw what the scouts had seen. In the distance, maybe 5 miles away, was a mass of figures moving in our direction. "Is that them?" Julius asked me. "I think so, the sun isn't out, so I can't tell," I said, looking at the moving mass. "It has to be, who else would be out here with an army?" Jane said to my left. Shrugging my shoulders I said. Let's wait here for the Volturi to arrive. Since the start of the journey, the Volturi heads have been trying to avoid me. To be fair, I can't blame them, it's not every day someone rips you apart. As we waited for the Volturi's army to arrive at the hill, me, Jane and Julius continued to watch the approaching army. From the look of it, there were no less than 2,000 in the group, and if it was the Romanian coven, then we might have an issue. Because that's an almost 4-to-1 advantage the Romanian coven will have on us. About 10 minutes later the front line of the Volturi's vampires finally reached the hill we were sitting at while we watched the army's approach. As we sat I could hear the whispered conversations of some of the vampires. It's them, I overheard the scouts telling Arrow of their numbers, there is no way we can win. One of them said. So it is the Romanian coven, I thought. Look at that, if that is the Romanian coven's army, we might as well turn back and run. Another said. And I agreed, if this was the Romanian army we might be screwed. But there was still a chance. With Alec, Julius, Jane, and myself, we could do large amounts of damage to the army on our own, just as long as we don't get bogged down in vampires trying to kill us. I should be fine on my own, with my speed, strength, and inability to die. Julius should also be fine, since if anyone gets too close he can wave his hand and launch them into orbit. What really worried me was Jane. Jane was technically the weakest member of our trio. Her ability may be strong and she can use her powers on more than one person at once, but it does have its limits. I looked it up, she is limited in range and number of people she can use her powers on at once. Her limit is 20 vampires that she could immobilize at once, giving others time to kill them, while Jane's power keeps them from fighting back. Her weak link is that she tends to rely on her powers more than her physical fighting skills, which might be problematic. Turning to look at Julius and Jane I spoke. When we fight, Jane, you need to stay close to Julius. That is what I was thinking. Julius said. I saw a small frown appear on Jane's face, so before she could protest my decision, I spoke. Jane, you are a good fighter, but you aren't the best, and in this fight we are going to be massively outnumbered, 4-to-1, and me and Julius can't try and protect you while we also fight the Romanian coven, but if you stick with Julius, he should be able to protect you without much trouble. I said, looking her in the eyes. Jane nodded her head. I understand, and besides, me and Julius have come up with some good attacks, we should be able to hold our own. I nodded my head at her words. Good. Just then I heard the noise behind us starting to get louder. Turning my head, I could see the Volturi heads making their way through the crowds of vampires, until they were standing in front of the army, and a few feet from me. Looking over at them I couldn't stop a smirk from appearing on my face. They still refused to even acknowledge my existence. My brother and sisters. Arrow said in a raised voice to quiet the mass of Volturi vampires. Today is the day we take what is ours, what has always been ours. He shouted. But Arrow didn't get the sounds of affirmation he was expecting. Because unlike when they took down the Egyptian coven which only has 200 members, now they were going up against a true threat of power. And this just showed Arrow's delusional mind. For him to believe that his members would be willing to dive headfirst into what he thought was an all but certain victory, but in reality was a death sentence. Which made me wonder how they managed to win the first time. Did I change the world to the point the Romanian coven accidentally ended up with more vampires than in the original world, or did the Volturi have less members than they were originally supposed to have? Or was this how it played out in the real Twilight world, and the Volturi actually won with this low of numbers, which was hard to believe, but stranger things have happened. Unaware of the lack of reaction, Arrow spoke again. And we will take the role of the ruling coven, of the world. He shouted. This time as I watched the Volturi's army of vampires, I saw a glassy look come over their eyes for a split second, before a cheer rose from the crowd in an approving shout for Arrow's words. It's Chelsea, she's here. I thought as I watched their faces. I wasn't sure if she had come with the army or not. Because the wives weren't here, and if I remembered correctly, she was normally with the wives. I was glad I made Julius keep the mind shields in place throughout the trip just in case. I wasn't sure if the Volturi might have a mind reader in the group or another psychic that can do things to our minds, so I decided it would be better to be safe than sorry, and from the look of it, it was a good decision. By now the Romanian coven army was close enough to see them clearly. And I was a bit shocked at what I saw. Mixed into the group were what looked like kids and young adults, no older than 10 years old, as well as people that looked like regular villagers. That's it, most of these people look like newborns, when that group saw us pass by that town, they probably told the Romanian coven heads, and probably in a panic they started making a newborn army. I thought in shock. They even turned the kids. I thought, with a spike of anger that shot through me. As Arrow continued his speech, I turned to Jane and Julius. The both of you need to be extra careful, this isn't going to be easy, from the look of it, most of those vampires down there are newborn, so they will be a lot stronger than you, and faster. They won't know how to fight, so that will be to your advantage if you have to fight them hand to hand, but try to avoid it. I said to them, turning to Julius, I continued. And Julius, make sure not to lose control of your mind shields. I'm certain, Chelsea is here, and all it will take is a moment for her to enter your mind, so don't overdo yourself, if you need to fall back, and recharge yourself. Julius nodded at my words. By now, only a mile separated the two armies from each other. Running back to behind the army, we dropped off our packs, and prepared ourselves for the battle. Pulling out the sword from my pack, I looked it over for any signs of damage or marks. While Julius and Jane took off the cloaks they were wearing to give them better movement. Once done getting ready, we went back to the front of the army, where Arrow was just finishing his speech. Now, don't be afraid of this battle, for we shall win with our overwhelming strength, and stand victorious over our fallen foes. And with a shout, Arrow raised a hand into the air, while his army of brainwashed vampires cheered him on. Turning to look at Jane and Julius, I gave them a nod. Remember, stick together, and watch each other's backs. We will at 'em. Julius said, as he gave my shoulder a pat. Turning away from them, I opened my interface and scrolled through my music list until I found the folder I had prepared just for this moment, War Music. Clicking on the folder, the first song to play was one from Doom. Rip and Tear. Just then, I heard a shout from the Romanian army. Turning to look, I saw a massive group of blurring figures heading right for us. And an evil smile covered my face as the head-banging music filled my head. Word count, word count, word count, word count, word count, word count, word count. JK, I'm gonna do the whole fight in one chapter, so I hope you enjoy it. As soon as the Romanian coven started to charge, so did the Volturi. Running full speed to the front of the Volturi's forces, I raised my hand, and pushed out a medium-sized energy orb. 10 feet from the Romanian coven I let it loose. The shockwave hit the front line with force, sending all that was in front of me, 5 feet across and 10 feet back. 50 vampires were shot backwards, with broken and separated limbs, from the force of running full speed into my shockwave. The opening I made allowed me to run straight into the heart of their forces. With my blade flashing a bright purple, I twirled through the vampires, cutting off heads and limbs with every swing. Occasionally letting off a shockwave or two to allow me some room, and not to be completely surrounded. As I was fighting, I saw out of the corner of my eye Jane and Julius. At the moment, Julius had a handful of vampires in the air, floating around him and Jane. He was using the floating bodies as weapons to hit the vampires that were downed by Jane's mental firepower, using the bodies like hammers to crash down into the heads of the downed vampires. Having to take my eyes away from them to avoid the hand of a vampire that got too close. I delved back into the fight once again. At the moment the fight wasn't going in the Volturi's favor. Even with me, Jane, Julius and Alec's powers, we were still losing too many of our own forces to the power of the newborns, while the Volturi had stayed on the hill looking down at the fight, with a few of their personal guards still standing guard by them, while the rest fought with Alec. Needing to give the Volturi's forces the upper hand, I turned in Julius's direction and shouted. I'm going all out. That was the wording we set up for when I push out all of my energy at once to make the big shockwaves. But I needed to go farther into the Romanians' army, and away from the Volturi's forces. So with a plan in mind, I zoomed through the army, cutting down any that got in my way. I had to cut down a few kids on the way, but at the moment I didn't have time to think about the fact that I just cut a little kid's head off of his shoulders, and I just focused on the plan I had in my mind. Finally, on the other side of the army from the front line, and deep inside the Romanian army by myself. Now surrounded on all sides by newborn vampires that could smell my blood, I was hard-pressed to deflect and avoid all the oncoming attacks. Making a small opening for myself, I used the second of time I had made myself, to crouch down, and push the energy from my body all at once. Third POV. Like the explosion of a modern-day bomb, a purple hue swept the battlefield. Throwing all within a 30-foot radius from the explosion back and into each other with such forces, that it killed almost 100 vampires from the force of being knocked back and into other vampires. Within 50 to 60 feet, all vampires were knocked from their feet, to tumble on the ground. Farther from that, all the force did, was push them forward, and the stumble, giving a few of the Volturi vampires the upper hand, to attack their now stumbling opponents. First POV. Standing from my crouched position, I looked around myself at the carnage my aura shockwave caused, and once again was amazed at the destruction my powers caused. As I looked around, I saw Julius taking the opportunity to attack the downed vampires, my using his power to levitate groups of downed vampires, then slamming them together mid-air, until they were beating themselves to pieces with each other's bodies. While Jane used her powers to make the rising vampires to fall back to the ground in pain with her power. Seeing a black mist making its way through a large group of vampires, I looked over to see Alec's mist taking away vampires' senses while the Volturi guards that were with him, tore the heads off the senseless vampires. Hearing fast approaching feet from behind me, I twirled around, and dodged the hand that tried to claw at me with the long nails of the hand. As I dodged I got a good look at who it was that attacked and smiled an evil smile at who it was. Because it was none other than Vladimir. With his almost white blonde hair and crimson eyes. Well, looky here, if it isn't one of the Romanian coven heads. I said, pointing my sword at him. You, I've heard of you, the human god. He spat. You are no god, if you were then you could have saved those innocent villagers you tried to save. I ground my teeth together at his words. I never said I was a god, and I might not have been able to save that village, but I will avenge them and wash their blood from my hands, with the death of you and the rest of the Romanian coven. I said, before I charged Vladimir at full speed. The speed of my movements sent Vladimir's survival instincts haywire, and made Vladimir backpedal in an attempt to avoid my attack. But he was just too slow. Like a wraith of death, I came out of my blurred run swinging my sword vertically down, and into his head. With a crack my sword split Vladimir down the middle and into two separate halls. The sight of his shocked face before I cut him in two would be something I would remember and enjoy for the rest of time. Turning back to the fight, I watched as the Volturi slowly gained the upper hand in the fight. But looking back at Alec's fight, I saw one of the other Romanian heads toughen in a hand-to-hand fight with Alec, while the rest of the Volturi guards that were there to protect Alec, fought the Romanian head's own guards. The Romanians were clearly the better fighters. With the average Romanian guard being over 800 or 900 years old, and the Volturi guards on average being 600 to 700 years old. The Volturi guards didn't stand much of a chance. Just then the memory of Jane's words flashes through my mind. Kill him, because I know he would rather be dead than some puppet. If I let the Romanian coven kill him, I could avoid the problem of the Volturi being angry with me for killing their biggest asset, but how to make sure he stays dead? Reaching into a pouch I had at my waist, I pulled out a small round clay ball with a fabric fuse coming from the top. In all it was smaller than a baseball. On the inside was a flammable oil. It wasn't big enough to be compared to a Molotov cocktail, but enough to catch their clothes on fire. Waiting for the right moment, I pulled a flint from the same pouch, and watched the fight, while making sure no vampires were coming from behind me. Not seeing anything I looked back, and continued to watch. For being a fraction of the age of Stefan, Alec was putting up one hell of a fight. But just like Jane, Alec clearly practiced with his powers more than he ever did with hand-to-hand, because every time Alec tried to make distance to use his powers, Stefan was right behind him constantly attacking, and not letting Alec use his powers. Back and forth the fight continued until finally Alec made a mistake, and paid the price. Taking the opening Alec didn't cover, Stefan got a hold of his arm and twisted it until it broke. As soon as I saw that Stefan had taken the upper hand of the fight, I hit the flint together close to the fabric fuse, until it finally caught. Looking up, I watched as Alec's head was ripped from his head. Standing up, I pulled my arm back, and with as much straight as I could put into it, I threw the small clay container at Alec's now headless body. I watched as my mini Molotov flew through the air, to hit Alec's still falling body in the chest. As soon as the clay burst open, the oil hit the fiery fuse, and a ball of fire burst out over Alec's body. There! I said as I watched the body burn. Turning my gaze to Stefan who was backing away from the now burning body of Alec with a confused look. Now it's your turn. I said to myself, as I blurred full speed in his direction. He didn't even see as I blurred to his side, and sliced his head off right above the mouth. And before his body could fall to the ground I pushed his body into the burning body of Alec, to hopefully add fuel to the fire. Now with the Romanian coven leaders dead and Alec gone, now all I needed to focus on was the last remaining vampires. Looking around I watched the fighting. Jane and Julius were working in perfect cohesion, as Jane made the vampires in front of her fall in pain, while Julius picked them up and tore them apart. So deciding they didn't need my help, I turned to help the Volturi's guards who were still fighting the Romanian guards. In a blur, I ran in between each of the guards, killing or maiming the Romanian vampires. Once the Volturi guards had the upper hand, I turned on the remaining Romanian vampires, which were only a few hundred. At the moment they still outnumbered us, especially since we had lost almost half of our forces, but those who remained were the strongest the Volturi had. So in a blur I ran at the still fighting vampires, and started shooting off aura bullets at the backs of the Romanian vampires, taking out 2 or 3 vampires out with each shot. Then as I ran out of energy, so I entered the melee and started causing havoc. Cutting AMD slices off any limbs in my way, not noticing if they were women, man, or vampiric child, I swung with abandon, as I lost myself in the fight, and the heavy metal music that still filled my head. After what felt like only minutes, I ran out of bodies to cut. Finally breaking from my trance, I looked around, at the hundreds of bodies that littered the ground. Holy shit, we did it! I thought to myself as I looked out at the battlefield. Opening my interface, I turned the volume of the music down, and looked around for Julius and Jane. I saw them killing off the last of the vampires, who were still alive on their half of the battlefield. As I watched Julius break one of them in half, I couldn't help but let a smile dawn my face. We did it, and all in one piece. I thought as I saw them, but then I looked around to count our own numbers. And I was a little surprised, because all that remained was 20 of us in total. With me, Jane and Julius, the 3 Volturi heads, the 7 remaining guards, and 8 surviving regular vampires. Shit, I said out loud as I saw how close the battle was for the Volturi. But we did it, we won, and now I can move on with my immortal life, and put this part of my life behind me. Underscore 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 underscore. Well, there we go, the first arc of the story is over, and now I can start doing some cool shit with the MC, because we are starting to come to the part of history the MC knows, and will be able to actually be a part of history. And by the way, I'm super tired, so I can't make any promises that I caught all of the mistakes in my check reads.
Thanks for listening.